Mount Rushmore, 32 counties, one county representative choosing their sporting Mount Rushmore. Some decisions are easy.
And I was seeing teachers who had never expressed any emotion whatsoever lose their mind when Sonny was running in that home straight, trying to catch that goal spot.
Others are controversial.
Mayo's greatest celebrity fan now helps him earn his place on Mayo's Mount Rushmore is Kevin Kilbane.
Join the debate across all our social channels at Off the Ball.
George O'Connor, 17 summers in purple and gold.
And catch the live decision making over the next few months on OTB AM, live every weekday at 7:30 AM on OTB Sports Radio. Off the Ball 2019 IMRO Radio Awards Sports Programme of the Year.
Salah takes the shot. Oh, Mo Salah with one of the goals of the season.
Who will see their dreams turn into reality? Whose names will be etched in history forever?
Offtheball.com, best online publisher at the 2019 Spider Awards.
A big breaking story on offtheball.com for you this morning. We have the very latest on the Mayo leaks. We now know what went on in that secretive Mayo County Board meeting.
2019 Irish Sponsorship Awards Best Radio Sponsorship, OTB Super Value GAA Roadshows.
Well, when she comes back, get your arse back here, he said. Star is out sitting on the swing and Darren O'Sullivan is pushing him.
OTB Sports Radio, live online 24/7 on the Go Loud app.
This is OTB Sports Radio. OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Yeah, you're very welcome along to OTB AM. It's Wednesday, the 29th of April. It's Ger and Eoin with you every morning from 7:30 all the way through until 10 o'clock. If you've got anything you'd like to get off your chest, sport or otherwise related, you can WhatsApp the show 0879 180 180. Or the best place to get us is, of course, on any of the social media platforms that you're watching us. So we stream live on YouTube. You can cast us to your TV if you want. We're also live on facebook.com/offtheball or indeed twitter.com/offtheball as well. And indeed, if you need to leave us a comment, you can use the hashtag OTBAM. Coming up on the show this morning, we're going to continue our response and reaction to the news that a Carlow footballer has been banned for 4 years for taking the drug meldonium. Eamon McGee is going to give us the player's view of the drug testing regime. Professor Sam McConkey is going to join us to talk to us about the potential return of contact sports and what might need to happen if that was actually to happen, either in Ireland or indeed what he thinks of the Premier League plans, which seem to be in a bit of disarray this morning to get football back in England. Many of the bigger leagues around the world are now making plans for no football to return until September, which might well mean that last season is null and void in some countries and no league title will be given out. Then there are other countries where it's clear who the best team was, i.e. Liverpool, for example. And there's also some talk in rugby about giving Leinster the Pro 14 title. So all of that will be discussed over the course of the next 2.5 hours. And today, Derry Girls star Louisa Harland is going to put Gamara in the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, brought to you by Now TV. That's coming up after 9 o'clock this morning. First, though, Dr. Una May is the Director of Participation and Ethics at Sport Ireland. And she spoke with Joe last night about the annual doping report from Sport Ireland. Really interesting stuff. This is a potted history of exactly what last year in anti-doping has been and why they drug test by way of urine and blood for certain things. So if you've never seen anything about drug testing, then this is the primer that you needed. Have a look.
Now then, you're welcome back. Hour 2 of the show this evening. So earlier on, obviously, we brought you the news of Ray Walker's 4-year ban, his acceptance of his 4-year ban for the positive test for meldonium, Carlow footballer. Before all of that broke, we spoke to Dr. Una May. She's with Sport Ireland. She's their Director of Participation and Ethics. Today was the launch of the Sport Ireland anti-doping report for 2019. Obviously an annual event now. They're into year 20 of anti-doping, and their anti-doping report for 2019 published today. So I spoke to her earlier on this morning, Dr. Una May, and if you're wondering why there's no mention of Ray Walker, then that is why. This was before that news broke. So here you are, Dr. Una May from this morning.
Okay, so you may have seen already that Sport Ireland published their anti-doping annual review, and I'm very happy to say to discuss, we're joined by Dr. Una May. She's Sport Ireland's Director of Participation and Ethics. Una, you're very welcome. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks very much, Joe. It's good to talk.
So we might start with the headlines from the report then. So this is looking back at 2019. We have 5 adverse findings and 2 other anti-doping rule violations. So 3 of those 7 issues have been announced. Brandon Mealy, people will remember that case. The League of Ireland footballer received a 2-year ban. He left the ground before finishing his test and has given his reasons as to why. There's an Irish wrestler who's been given a 3-month ban for cannabis. And then in motorsport, a 4-month ban as well for cannabis, which leaves 4 outstanding adverse findings or violations, 3 in competition, 1 out of competition. Is that about the gist of where we are in terms of violations?
Yeah, no, that sums it up. That's from 2019. And look, these numbers, they go up and down each year. So there's no, it doesn't, it's not, the number doesn't kind of alert us to being a big issue or whatever. It does fluctuate depending on just various factors. But yeah, that's it. We have those 3 that are resolved and 4 that are pending.
Okay. So the data is so small there in terms of those numbers. It like last year, there was 1 case. It was the boxer Evan Metcalf. Again, that was a cannabis derivative. It's not like the data suggests anything in terms of doping on the rise, or that testing is all that more effective. Are you happier when you have 7 violations versus 1 last year? Do you count last year where you've just 1 as a disappointing year, almost, in a perverse way of putting it?
Well, to be honest, it's something we've always avoided because we don't want to be measured by the number of cases we have. We can argue either way. If you've a lot of cases, it could mean there's a problem, or it could mean you're catching them all, or it could mean that you're not deterring them or you are deterring them. So, we try very hard to avoid referring to the cases as being a measure of the success of our programme and whether we're disappointed or not disappointed. We get cases, and as long as we take them seriously and we follow through and we follow due process and we believe that everybody has received a fair hearing, then we're comfortable that that's what our job is, to make sure that if we do catch people, that we do follow through with the process.
It's certainly very striking at the moment that of the 3 failed tests that are not outstanding over the last 2 years, they're all cannabis. So obviously cannabis is not the enemy here when it comes to performance enhancing drugs.
I suppose that's reflected in the small sanctions in those cases. Cannabis is still prohibited, and for as long as it's on the list, athletes can't take it. But it is not prohibited in competition. And therefore, if an athlete is tested positive in competition for the substance, well, actually, they wouldn't get it in competition. But if they can prove that it's not in any way connected to the competition, so if they can prove the circumstance in which it was consumed, and it allows for the possibility of a reduced sanction. And as I said, the sanction is a reflection on the fact that we don't believe it is the real core problem that we're trying to deal with in sport. But it's important that people know that it is banned, and all kinds of substances are banned, and people should never put anything inside their bodies that they don't know what they're doing or what they're taking on, and whether it's banned or not.
Yeah. So talk to us about how many performance enhancing drugs there are out there which can still evade current testing technology. Are we years behind? Are we decades behind? Do we know?
No, I don't think we're far behind at all, to be totally honest with you. There's very little that athletes, there will always be small tweaks, and, over the years we've seen evidence of the fact that, people will try to find, try and manipulate, say, a steroid, and manipulate some sort of slight molecule in a steroid so that it wouldn't be detectable. We're pretty much on top of an awful lot of that, and it's why we've seen trends, and what we find with, for example, the biological profiling is we're seeing that something is going on in an athlete's system, and even if we can't detect the substance, we can see that there's something that's been manipulated and that their body is not reacting as normal. And so, we've noted, for example, in blood doping, we've seen the trends have totally flipped. So in many years ago, athletes took their own blood and reinfused it. Then they discovered EPO, then we got a test for EPO. They discovered new types of variants of EPO. We discovered tests for these products. Then they went back and they started to infuse other people's blood. Then we discovered that we could detect the difference in the blood types very easily. And now they've gone back after many years to not all, obviously it's not a huge trend, but we can see that athletes have gone back, the cases in the biathlon and the likes that were uncovered in Austria last year, where the athletes are reinfusing their own blood. So the fact that this is our 20th annual report is actually quite timely with that question, in that we've seen the trends have changed over those 20 years, and the means by which we can catch athletes, be it by detecting with better analytical tests, or alternatively with slightly different methods. So, for example, looking at their biological profiles, it has evolved over those 20 years. So, I mean, I think athletes will find things, and we know that athletes will use substances that haven't even been tested on humans yet. And those who are desperate will take desperate measures. But on the whole, I think that, you know, it's clear that, you know, we have analytical methods for the detection of a lot of substances. And you'll see in the report that we do store a number of samples every year, and we do reanalyze some of those samples when we believe we have new analytical methods for doing things. So where we might feel that there's a potential that an athlete may have found something, but we have no method of detecting what it is, we can put a sample in storage, and then in due course, yes, you know, if a new analytical method is discovered, we can use it.
Yes, in the 2019 report, 83 athlete samples have been placed in long-term storage for that very reason. What dictates which samples stay?
Well, you know, we've all of our sports, so all of our testing, our whole program is determined by what we call our test distribution plan, and that is developed in accordance with the risks of a sport. So the physiological risks, the physiological demands of a sport, the risks in terms of, say, the profile of a sport or the history of doping in a sport, and we categorize all our sports into those sort of bands, and we plan our testing based on that information. And then as athletes come through our system, depending on the standards they reach, depending on their results in competitions, and depending on what sports they're in, or if, as I said, something cropped up in a biological profile that we felt just didn't seem quite 100% right to us, and we didn't have the full insight as to what might be going on, but we have a concern that maybe something could be happening, then we have the possibility to store the sample in that case.
Okay. I saw last year there were 381 blood tests and 922 urine tests. What dictates which? Is one more effective than the other? Does it come down to cost? Is it you're looking for different things? So why 381 blood and why 922 urine?
Yeah, you are looking for different things. Urine is a much broader spectrum of substances that are available to sample, to analyse in urine. It's a better, on the whole, it's a better substance for analysing the biggest spectrum of doping substances. However, there are a small number of things that can only be detected in blood. And also, if we're looking at substances which manipulate the blood, so those in endurance sports, then we collect the samples, the biological passport samples, and those are blood samples, and we review them separately through the biological profile.
Okay. In the whole, people might be wondering how many tests happened across the year. So 1,300, give or take, blood and urine samples. 1.944 million was spent. This is Ireland and overseas. Out of competition testing, 79% of tests were out of competition. Una, how does the financial backing that we have here, that Sport Ireland has here, the 1.9 million spent, how does that compare, say, per head of population with the leading countries when it comes to anti-doping?
They vary enormously from one country to another, so it depends on the funding model. So if you take, for example, the US Anti-Doping Agency is not funded by the government at all. It's all funded through the US Olympic Committee and through private funding. So it depends on the models, but we are relatively well funded. We do probably, we're in the top, I would say, 1 to 5% of countries in the world with relative to the amount of tests we do per our athlete population, and particularly per our highest performing athlete population. So we do a lot of testing relative to our numbers, so we're well supported. We've agreed with our own board that we will ensure that we protect the funding for anti-doping, that if we get an increase in funding for high performance sport, that we will also always introduce a parallel increase in the anti-doping funding, so that, you know, at all times, if we increase the emphasis on, or the pressure, or the I suppose the investment in high performance sport, that we maintain a strong anti-doping program in line with that at all times.
By sport, the breakdown is given as well in the report. So cycling tops the list, 218 tests in cycling in 2019. Rugby is second with 196, and athletics third with 154. How many cyclists are we testing here? I'm surprised cycling is so high. Is this just professional cyclists?
You see, I've always latched on to the professional kind of the idea of people, whether they're professionals or not. Cycling is a high-risk sport, as everyone knows. It has a long history of doping, so therefore it's high risk from that perspective. But we also, you have to bear in mind that we're covering track cycling, road cycling, all sorts of disciplines. We have a lot of disciplines. And in a year coming up to an Olympic year, we always include additional things who hope to qualify. We would have had teams, just individuals, but also qualify for the Olympics within track cycling. So we have a lot of athletes on our register, and we've had some very good performances, particularly amongst our Paralympic cyclists, with some very good performances. So, the numbers will be dictated by the circumstances. So be that the number of athletes, the kind of performances the athletes are producing, and also the year ahead and what's coming up and what we're looking into the future. So particularly, obviously, last year we would have been focused on pre-Olympic testing. Obviously, that's all a little bit different this year. Yeah. But that influenced the numbers on our programme last year.
Okay. Rugby has steadily moved up this chart in terms of the number of testing. It's up to second now, 196. So it's clearly considered high risk. Why? What are you seeing? What are you thinking about the sport, which now means it's number 2 on the list of sports that you're watching and testing very closely?
Well, I suppose what you'd have to bear in mind that last year was a World Cup year. So, as I said before, when there's a big event coming up, that can often influence the numbers. But I mean, look, the physiological, I suppose, risks associated with rugby, it is a very physically demanding sport, and therefore it has a risk associated with it. We also are high performing in Ireland within rugby. We're up there and the best in the world, and therefore that puts our rugby players in a higher risk category. So again, like before, there's just the risks just vary on from year to year, and depending on what's going on in the world at the time.
And are there more tests happening in rugby now as opposed to, say, 15 years ago? It's considered more high risk now, I would put it to you.
Well, I think the point is that in the last 20 years, we've more than doubled the amount of tests across all sports. So I don't think proportionally it's a significantly greater amount of tests in rugby. Okay. We have broadened the net, and we're aware that people have had have asked that we'd focus more on younger players and that sort of thing. So we do more testing in the academies, and so we've broadened the net to cover a greater range of players. But I don't think it's disproportionately increased. All our testing has increased.
Okay. I know in New Zealand they test schoolboy players, and there's concerns, naturally enough, here, I'm sure you're well aware of them, of schoolboy rugby and steroid culture or supplement culture. Are you in favour of testing schoolboy rugby players if the legislation can be passed, whatever boxes need to be ticked?
It is important to be aware that we do test schoolboy rugby players. We just don't test them within the schools. So the schoolboys who come up through the ranks and who get into the academies, who would be the top sort of schoolboy players within the under-18s categories, they're within the academies and they're within our programme. So whilst we don't actually go into the schools to carry out testing, we do test the higher risk schoolboy players. And we're also we work very closely with the IRFU. We work on not just planning of the testing programme and how we make sure that the right people are accessible in terms of testing, but also particularly around the education programme. The IRFU have been doing huge work in the last few years around their education programme, and they've developed a whole ethics kind of programme, their Spirit of Rugby programme, which covers ethics and ethical decision making and values in sport. So reaching people from right at a younger age to bring them all the way through, so that when it comes to a point in their career where they might be tempted to take a chance, that it's not just about the risk of being caught, but it also that their values have been, I suppose, developed in such a way that they don't face such a great temptation.
And would you feel there's a need to extend that beyond the top rugby players? Like, we could be talking about people of an age where they're very close and within touching distance of an academy contract and therefore may be tempted.
Well, and I think this is where the education programme is really important, and that education programme is going into the schools. So that's very important to us. Look, we could keep testing and we keep going down and down and down, and then it's like the ones who are at risk of getting to be that risk group then. So we believe that, once they get to the academies, they're at a point in their career in rugby where they're making a decision, and it's important for them to make their career for the future decision as to what direction they want to go in. And so we would see that that's the appropriate level.
Okay. Therapeutic use exemptions, 44 approved. You list the TUE panel. How does that work as of 2019 in Ireland? So does the athlete's doctor make a submission? The athlete isn't personally examined by any of the Sport Ireland panel, or are they?
No. So if an athlete has a requirement to take a medication that's not permitted in sport, they then apply and they fill in documentation with the support of their doctor. They provide supporting documentation to verify the kind of tests that have been carried out to ensure that they can provide adequate and sufficient evidence that they do have the medical condition that they require the medication for. And the doctor supports that by signing off on the form. And then that is sent in to us. And we have a panel of specialist medical people who review the cases depending on the medication. They are specialists in that particular area, and they determine whether it's appropriate for the person to use it based on their medical history and their medical records. If it's appropriate that they should be allowed to take something which otherwise would be prohibited, and that they can demonstrate that it's not going to give them a particularly unfair advantage. All it's doing is bringing back the level playing field for that individual.
And is there a concern that TUEs are being abused?
We wouldn't have a concern with that. The number of TUEs we would say is relatively small. It's not a big number. 1,900 tests and 1,300 tests and 44 TUEs is not a big number really.
You mentioned in the report quite interestingly now, targeted testing is obviously something that makes perfect sense. And as of 2019, you strengthened your investigative powers. You've engaged what you call an experienced and professional investigator who has also worked with the Gardaí, with the Food Safety Authority. So is it an experienced and professional investigator? So is this like a one-man team with a top hat and wears a coat and goes around watching athletes? What's going on here?
He's a former Garda, who's a former senior investigations officer in the Gardaí. He's got a lot of experience of dealing with high-profile, sensitive investigations. So he's very skilled, very experienced in very high-profile, very technical areas within investigations, as I said, at a very sensitive kind of high-profile investigations within the Gardaí. So he's no longer with the Guards. He's now working part-time for us. So he brings that expertise with him, but he also brings that connection and those contacts. It's very important when you're looking for the support of law enforcement that they fully trust the people that they share information with. And I think if it's somebody that they recognise as being one of their own, that helps us with the relationship. But it also means we have the skills that he has to investigate cases much more closely than we would have had those skills ourselves. I think anybody is capable of going online and looking and exploring a little bit more deeply, but this is an individual who has, is qualified and experienced in looking much more closely into cases and situations for us to support the work we do.
In practice, does that extend to potentially checking phone records, potentially following athletes? Like, what does that mean in practice? Give us one example.
Well, we won't be checking phone records and we won't be following athletes because that would be against the law. So we still operate within the normal legal system, but it means that they have the skills to explore more deeply information that they receive. So if we get tip-offs on our hotline about a situation, then they have the knowledge and expertise to review that sort of information. And they can also share and work with the law enforcement agencies, so the likes of the health products regulatory authorities, the customs, the guards, and they know how to analyse information. We've all received training in Sport Ireland in the anti-doping unit around assessing information and the validity of information and whether you would deem it to be inappropriate and maybe that it might be somebody with some sort of a vexatious kind of an approach to trying to I suppose point the finger at someone inappropriately. These people who have more experience than us are better able to ensure that the information we receive is right and accurate.
Okay. An extension of the targeting question. Are there certain athletes that you would test virtually week on week or month on month? Do you have athletes in mind that you have question marks over and therefore you're testing multiple times a year, far more, in a very deliberate and concerted way? Does that happen?
It can happen. It occasionally happens. It's not very common. There are some athletes who we would definitely test more than other athletes, and that comes back to our standardised, test distribution plan and our risk assessments. And some athletes in some sports, depending on their status, their I suppose their position within their rankings, within their sport, those sort of things, those would be athletes that we'd naturally target more than others. Some people it would be obvious that we would carry out more testing on them if they're higher risk.
Okay. There are opportunists everywhere, and even the COVID crisis presents an opportunity. So how do you manage at the moment? Blood and urine tests have fallen right off. Are you able to keep pace with what you would have done out of competition last year?
No, I mean, clearly we're not doing we're not following our routine normal testing program. Whilst, sport and the integrity of sport is critical from our point of view, the health and well-being of all the athletes and the testers is far more important. So we're not doing our routine testing. However, we have ensured that all of our test team are equipped with all the personal protective equipment, with procedures, with guidelines. WADA have issued guidelines. We're part of a network of national anti-doping organisations who've shared with each other how best to ensure that if, in the event that we feel it's important and necessary to target an athlete, that we can take all the precautions necessary. And we're monitoring closely other countries. So we know that the US Anti-Doping Agency, for example, are piloting a virtual testing situation. So we're monitoring that. We'll look closely and see how it goes. It's a pilot study. What we would like to do is ensure that we maintain the integrity of our testing program and that it's fully effective at all times. And therefore we want to keep as close to our standard procedures as we can. But we're investigating all sorts of possible options that if there's a small relaxation in the restrictions, that we believe it's going to be appropriate for us to increase the number of tests again, then we're looking at maybe bringing our mobile testing unit into play so that we can test people not without actually going into their homes. So, we're looking at all kinds of options to ensure that, once the situation relaxes a little bit, that we can, ensure that we can increase the testing slowly but surely. But right now, our focus is more on the intelligence information that we can achieve.
On the James Cronin case, he's been banned for a month. As I understand it, Sport Ireland have until maybe mid-May to appeal that situation. Is that appealing the length of the ban, or is that appealing the finding of the investigation, or both? Are both open to you?
Yeah, no, there are a number of parties who are, according to the World Anti-Doping Agency, who can appeal a case. And we would be one of those parties who could appeal a case. And you can appeal a case based on any number of different elements to it. So you can appeal a case based on the sanction, based on the process. So there are a number of different things you could look at. Okay.
A general question here, because in the case of James Cronin, it's been reported that there was no cross-examination as such. There was no get-together in person or anything like that. It was a handing over of documents in his defence. Is that the norm? Is that how things normally happen, or is there usually some sort of cross-examination in person?
Cases can go in either way. It can, it's possible, and the rules would permit it, and it's not unheard of that cases would be dealt with purely on paperwork alone, depending on the circumstance of a case, whether or not the parties feel it's appropriate or necessary to cross-examine. Then and a panel will make a decision. Generally, the chairman of the panel, in our case, the legal chair of the panel, would make a judgment call on whether it's appropriate and whether they believe that it's necessary to have cross-examination or not.
Okay. And again, I appreciate you can't specifically comment on this case, but it would strike me that rugby quite often, even for an issue like a tackle or a sizing, a player might appear before a panel. Now, admittedly, they may be defending themselves of any wrongdoing in the tackle, but not always. So therefore, I would have thought it just would have been a natural thing to do all of this in person in a room, no?
An awful lot has come down to the kind of documentation that's provided and, the degree of evidence and supporting documentation. And if all the information behind a case is sufficient, then it may be appropriate that there isn't a cross-examination. And that's purely based on the circumstances of any particular case.
Okay. How big a consideration are finances for you? I mean, you have a budget, you have to spend it wisely, I'm sure. How costly is it to appeal a case?
If we feel it's appropriate to appeal a case, we'll appeal the case, and we'll make sure, and Sport Ireland will ensure, and we have the backing of the department and the ministers. They've always been very supportive of the anti-doping cause, and it's something that we have full support when it comes to international events and all. If we had any shortfall in funding and we felt it was appropriate to pursue a case, the money would be made available.
Okay.
So funding does not determine our decisions. These things are expensive, for sure, but they don't determine our decision whether we appeal a case or not.
Okay. Last point, it was reported over the weekend that a GAA inter-county player had failed a test in competition. Can you confirm, deny, comment on that report at all?
I couldn't make any comment, in the same way as we've always been very clear that we can't comment on any cases, be it a case or not a case. We can neither confirm nor deny.
Yeah.
And, if in the event of there being a case, we've been very, very transparent at all times, and we always publish the full decision when a case is concluded, as we have with the 3 that were already concluded from 2019. So that's all I can say in that case.
Okay. Well, listen, I know you're rushing to get to another interview. So for the time being, Dr. Una May, Sport Ireland Director of Participation and Ethics. Thanks so much, Una.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station. OTB Sports Radio.
If you're feeling a little like you're going a bit stir crazy, take a break and listen to Richie's Isolation Mix. 1 hour of ad-free music every day from midday on OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the Go Loud app.
OTB AM.
Yeah, OTB AM here with you every morning from 7:30 until 10. Eoin, good morning to you. How are you?
Very well. How are things?
All good. 2 minutes past 8 here on Wednesday, the 29th of April. It's Hump Day on a bank holiday weekend. Roll on the bank holiday weekend, Eoin. What plans have you got?
What plans do I have? It's the May bank holiday is always an interesting one. I tend to never go home to Kerry for it anyway. That's something. So I guess it's the same as all bank holiday weekends. At this weekend, it's generally the rally weekend in Killarney, and you'd have people doing donuts outside your house and stuff like that. So if you're big into the rally, obviously it's a fantastic weekend. But it's the one weekend I tend to look at opportunities outside the southwest of Ireland.
Very good. Okay. What's going on? What has piqued your interest this morning? I've got to say that the news coming out of the papers is fairly bleak.
You're talking obviously about sport and return to play, and you're talking about Premier League stories. This is what you're referring to, I assume.
Yeah, well, so the Chief Medical Officer of FIFA has said that he doesn't think any football will be safe, at least until September. There is a member of the Connacht Council saying, cancel the GAA year now, get it done, just make the announcement, be leaders, don't allow us to be considered even being consumed by money, and let's make that call for 2020 to be gone and roll over to 2021. It's very early on. It's as we said, it's the May bank holiday weekend. So why don't we bide our time a little bit? Give ourselves as much room for a decision as we possibly can.
There's the thing that's kind of sticking out to me from the stories this morning is this very valid point that the Premier League clubs may almost feel they will be scapegoated if something goes wrong when play returns, and they're not just referring to somebody testing positive for coronavirus when they get back to play. It's more to do with the fans and the supporters and the parties outside stadiums, something that we saw at Paris Saint-Germain versus Borussia Dortmund before things shut down last month. Are we not going to give fans a little bit more credit than that? Are we not going to believe that they won't congregate around a stadium?
I don't know. I mean, I think apparently they're very concerned about what would happen, and it's one of the back page headlines in the newspapers, if Liverpool do get awarded the title, whether or not there would be a congregation of fans. We might as well actually get into the papers in just a minute. I'll tell you what's coming up on the show this morning. Here's our coming up. So Sports Pages, Eamon McGee is going to talk to us about, as a recently retired former player, what the drug testing regime was like when he was there, on the back obviously of the failed drug test for meldonium. After that, we are going to speak with Sam McConkey about what a return to play might look like, what conditions would have to prevail for that. Our How's the Head this morning, where we go around and ask various athletes how they're dealing with the crisis. Irish Rugby 15, Neil Treacy is putting his neck on the line and picking, fairly controversial Irish 15, best Irish 15 of the provincial era, the professional era. And then Louisa Harland, star of Derry Girls, is going to join us for today's OTB Culture Hall of Fame, where she's putting the TV series Gomorrah in. That's obviously brought to you in association with Now TV. Time for the papers.
OTB AM.
So, offtheball.com, that's the Carlo footballer, Dan Walker, facing a 4-year ban for positive meldonium tests. And Carlo GAA, obviously, he issued a statement fairly soon after our story yesterday, confirming that it was indeed him and that he would be accepting the 4-year ban. Obviously, it raises loads of questions, which we can get into in a couple of minutes' time. And again, stories about the third and fourth episodes of the Last Dance documentary series on Netflix, and it was all about Dennis Rodman. So the Rodman paradox, The Last Dance will make fans fall in love all over again. That's Kieran Bradley's piece on the site, and well worth digging out as well. Where are we heading first, Owen?
The Irish Independent this morning leads with that story about the Carlo footballer. Carlo player accepts 4-year ban. Walker accepts suspension, but not intent after failed February drugs test. We've also got a picture there of Michael Robinson, who sadly passed away yesterday. And the other story on the back page is Dan MacDonald's piece that the FAI asked to produce figures as clubs remain cool on closed doors plan. So the League of Ireland clubs remain unconvinced that they can get back to playing, that it is financially worthwhile for them to play behind closed doors. The FAI feel otherwise, and they have this week now to persuade them that behind closed doors is an option. A couple of other stories doing the rounds. Premier stars fear rush to restart. Keegan keeps the faith. It's a big ask, but we still believe there is an All-Ireland in this Mayo team, he says. And Rory O'Connor today, rugby should welcome extra scrutiny in wake of Cronin finding.
Okay, so the Irish Times is next. The Irish Times, former Ireland international, was a man of many talents. A brilliant picture of Michael Robinson flying down the wing against Russia, or the Soviet Union more accurately. And I think that might be just before he whips in that cross for the goal. What a brilliant shirt it is. Like one of the most photogenic footballers ever to play for Ireland, and then obviously a man of many talents because he becomes a giant in broadcasting in Spain. To the point where Rafa Nadal is saying that he made us happy yesterday when he passed away. Sorry, he made us happy while we were watching TV as opposed to, you know what I mean. Beloved figure found his way into Spanish hearts. That's from their Madrid correspondent. And clubs worried return may spark rise in COVID-19. It's the story that's rumbling on there about the football. And in England, the FAI awaiting feedback from stakeholders and return to play protocol. So the FAI are doing their best to come up with some plans and some way of getting people back into action. So that is your Irish Times this morning, and here is your Irish Examiner for you. GAA has case to answer over season ticket expert claims, and forced break may help Mayo's old guard, says Keegan. It's obviously a lot of those players probably could do with a bit of a rest. US interest, but League of Ireland needs FIFA cash boost, is John Fallon's story there, and lots of questions facing the GAA, but the answers are far less plentiful. So they haven't covered the Ray Walker story there on that page. Sorry, they have, yeah. Walker insists he did not knowingly take substance. So this is the story of the Cardiff footballer Ray Walker. I think I might have mistaken his first name a minute ago. Has maintained he did not knowingly take the banned substance meldonium, but has accepted a 4-year ban. Carlo GAA last night issued the statement saying Carlo GAA is aware that an adverse analytical finding against a member of its senior football panel is currently under the consideration of the Irish Sport Anti-Doping Disciplinary Panel. This is all a formality, really, because the reasoned decision was issued to the player on the 8th of April, so that's 21 days ago. He has 21 days to appeal. WADA can appeal, the GAA can appeal. There won't be any appeals. Obviously, he's accepted his 4-year ban, so you would expect tomorrow or the next day that there will be officially statements coming from Sport Ireland and subsequently statements from the GAA and the GPA around this as well. So it is going to be interesting to see exactly what the response is like there. And so the Dermot Jewell is the consumer rights expert. We spoke about this, I think, at the time, Owen, about how prescient the terms and conditions were on the season tickets. It turns out that the clause saying that in the result of a global pandemic there won't be refunds was actually inserted after the global pandemic happened. So it hadn't been there nestling snugly for years. A clause was inserted to state there would be no refunds provided in the event of the GAA Championship due to circumstances outside of the control. The date of the amendment was picked up by Twitter account @GAAPicks, which highlighted that the terms and conditions had been updated from the version released in December. The GAA stressed it is within its rights to adjust its small print of the loyalty scheme without making holders aware of such messages. GAA may make changes and update these terms and conditions at any time without further notice to you, because there's a clause which protects them from doing that. So the clause was added the week ending March 15th, said Alan Milton to the Irish Examiner. Amendments are catered for in the terms and conditions in the ticketing department of liaise with the season ticket holders who have made contact with various queries since the games have stopped. Like, it is a community organisation. It desperately needs funding at this time. If people can, so I had tickets for a play, and they keep ringing and saying, "Do you want the credit note or do you want your money back?" And I'm going to keep the credit note, because I think that I can afford the cost of these 2 tickets for now, and if they put another play on down the road, then I feel like there's a minor bit of support going on, right? So I'm not exactly busting my balls here. But likewise, with the season ticket holders, I think most GAA members are going to look at this and go, fair enough, you're a community organisation. However, in some instances, if people need the money back and they want that refund, then there probably needs to be some mechanism to help those people too.
It's interesting though, isn't it, that you can have something in your terms and conditions that says we can insert new terms and conditions at any point that we like. That's a fairly handy thing to have. I'm surprised. It definitely changes my view on this a small bit when I saw the story a couple of weeks back that the small print did exist about a global pandemic. I was like, fair enough. That's obviously them being well ahead of the curve. It does change it a small bit now that it was inserted afterwards. It has to. And I think if people have financial struggles and would actually do something with that money and it would make a big difference to them, then obviously I think they should have the right to a refund, no question about it. But I also hear what you're saying, that, I think the GAA has already spent some of this money in terms of giving back to clubs, for example. I'm not quite sure exactly where the money is going, but I know that a section of the season ticket money does go back to grassroots in the GAA, and some of that has already been spent. So, who knows? Maybe it's a situation where season ticket holders get a discount on next year's season ticket were they not to actually have, were there to be no games for the remainder of this year. And that way the GAA can probably readjust their spend next year. It's just an added tricky situation now that they've already spent some of this cash. It naturally raises a few eyebrows, and it's a great spot that the terms and conditions were updated after the change of the pandemic, because after the arrival of the pandemic, because we kind of said this is unbelievable. This is some foresight from the organisation to actually have this clause in.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like a piece of stunning prediction of what was going to happen in the world from whoever ended up writing us, but actually it was just somebody going, hey, look, we can update these now. And look, it's not ideal when you end up discovering these things and having to answer questions from the back foot. But look, I'm sure they're going to be able to work something out. And so you're a season ticket holder, right? How do you feel about it?
I'm okay with it, to be honest. I'm not up in arms about it. Similar to yourself, I kind of appreciate the value of everybody's contribution to the GAA. That being said, we're both in very fortunate positions to actually be able to do our job every day at the moment. Were that to change, who knows what the situation, who knows what financial situation you could be in then to actually say, well, I actually need every single euro at this moment. Also, as well, my view might change a little bit if things were actually cancelled. The things haven't been cancelled just yet. Again, I'd be astonished if anything actually went ahead this year, especially when it came to the remaining National League fixtures. But I'm okay with it personally, but I definitely can't speak for everybody on that front.
I mean, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that there are 2 league games in December, really, is it?
Well, the thing about that is that there is a function to it. It's not like it just tails off to the end. You do want to see the relegation and promotion questions decided this year, even if it is December, as you say, or even before next year's Allianz League is set to get underway. So that way you can have next year's league actually properly aligned, and then you can have next year's Tier 2 championship properly aligned. So there's a huge value to that, definitely. And as you say, it's only 2 weeks. So it could actually fit the perfect window that might come up at the start of next year or at the end of this year, whenever things might actually be safe to resume.
All right, what's next?
The Irish Daily Star is next. Call the Cops is the headline. Cops with a K. Police fear Anfield's title party. And PSG plan to finish abroad. So the owners of Paris Saint-Germain have seized the opportunity of no French sport happening before the start of September. And they're like, screw the Parc de France. We're going to Qatar to play the rest of our games if we're able to do that. So that's where they're planning to finish the rest of their season. And actually, see out the league. The league title that they so badly has sought. The Paris Saint-Germain, they'll be delighted that the party in the streets of Paris will be 10 times more than the party in the streets of Liverpool should Paris Saint-Germain do the unthinkable and win
the
league.
Yeah. It's so unexpected.
Just the other couple of stories from the start there. GAA can't leave players hanging all summer, says Lee Keegan, and that doping ban for Walker is mentioned as well.
I guess the point about Paris Saint-Germain is that they're desperate to play some football because it will keep them in the Champions League, and that's the back page picture there as well. It's Neymar and Mbappe. Sport ban in France sends UEFA into chaos. So essentially all organised sport has been banned until September, which means that the Champions League can't continue. That's why they're talking about perhaps playing some games in Qatar. I wonder would everybody be happy to fly to Qatar to play Paris Saint-Germain as their home ground? Not quite sure it would work like that, but anyway, we'll wait and see.
They can test out a few of the new stadiums. Are they finished?
I mean, look, it's a perfect thing for Qatar. They're obviously very ready for this World Cup, and there's no issues around that whatsoever. Top players fear rush to restart will risk health. This is what's happening on Friday. There's a meeting of the Premier League clubs, obviously by teleconference or video, whatever they're using, Zoom, Teams, who knows. And the clubs apparently are very anxious about what's about to happen. The only caveat to all these stories coming out are the last time that this meeting happened, there was going to be uproar about the season ending early, and then it didn't even come up as a conversation topic. So if the pattern is true here, leaks, kites being flown, deals done in the background, and a unified front will emerge on Friday where the Premier League clubs have decided unilaterally to kick the can down the road for another 2 weeks until something happens and the government step in and say you can't play football because it's too dangerous, or we have found a specific way to play football, or we've sorted something out that will allow this to happen, because essentially they're asking the Premier League clubs to make this massive public health decision, even though the Premier League clubs aren't qualified to do so. And the Premier League clubs are concerned at the moment that they're being used as some kind of smokescreen for a mishandling of the crisis on the part of the British government. So, difficult decisions for everybody involved in football to be making at the moment.
Very interesting layer to it all. Is it not that the Premier League clubs would actually start to feel this? That I think it's almost unusual. You would think for Premier League clubs to say, give us direction, given the amount of brains that I assume that they all think they have, and they would love to be able to handle every global pandemic, I'd imagine. But even at this moment, I'd say they're kind of sitting on ice a small bit and thinking to themselves, we need to actually be told here, otherwise this is going to look very, very badly on us if something goes wrong.
Yeah. So the Irish Daily Mail is next for me. And, from you, yeah.
Yeah, career ender is the headline on the Irish Daily Mail this morning. Banned player says fails test unintentional, and GAA defends stance on ticket refunds.
Yeah, the Glasgow boss Dave Rennie is also saying there that he thinks Leinster should be given the Pro 14 title now. Edinburgh are not so happy with that, obviously, because they're top of the other conference and they're like, hang on, we just have one game. Just give us one game against Leinster, give us an opportunity to beat them. I mean, it's not like Leinster are going to be a fully formed thing in their first game back. So a bit of brother-on-brother rivalry in rugby in Scotland. The next one for me is the London Times. It's a picture of an actual football training session with two recognisable footballers. So Germans step up bid to return to action. It's Lewandowski taking a shot, Manuel Neuer saving it. We can do a bit of commentary after this one. I know I want to save from training. I don't know if they have a channel. I'm presuming Bayern Munich do have a channel. Are they televising their training? If they're not, they should be. We'd all watch. Olympics cancelled if crisis lingers. This is another one of those stories. It's like there's this one. There's the headline there, revolt over Project Restart. And there's the Connacht Council guy saying, look, finish the year now. You're like, okay, so no Olympics next year. No football this year, and no GAA at all in 2021. You can put all these stories together, and we certainly have a good case to talk to Sam McConkey about what needs to happen and what he thinks is going to happen, and he's going to join us in about 15 minutes' time. But the Tokyo Olympics will be cancelled rather than delayed if the coronavirus crisis continues into next summer. the head of Japan's games, has said, this guy's an ex-president or prime minister of Japan and president of the Tokyo Olympic Committee, and says if the games have to be moved again, that's it. So it's happening next year or they don't happen at all. And he is hopeful that they will happen next year, but obviously a lot of different things have to happen between now and then, particularly if Japan would need to be comfortable that people from all around the world are going to be able to come, the athletes, and not bring the coronavirus with them.
They've spent a lot of money on this thing already. There's a point, I'd imagine, that people within the country will be like, we need to get people in here and actually give some of the money back so that we're not bankrupting ourselves too much. Like it's, I'd like to know the reaction from the Olympic Council and from the people in Japan who are heavily invested in this to those comments, actually, to see if they're actually supporting that or not, because he's clearly talking a lot of sense. That spokesperson there, I would say that this thing is very, very much in danger next year of not happening. The Irish Sun is the last one for me this morning. It's a picture of Harry Kane with a speech bubble saying, I might as well drive back home, because FIFA's medical chief says cancel the season. It's a life and death situation. And you've also got a bullet point there mentioning the French league being stopped and Toon television row. This is Premier League clubs raising their concerns over Saudi Arabia and television piracy. And that is the Irish Sun feed this morning.
Okay, so if anybody wants to get in touch, you can get us on WhatsApp. 0879 180 180 is the number, or you can use the hashtag OTB AM. Now, one of the big stories that is on the back of all of the newspapers is obviously the situation with regards to the Cardiff footballer who has failed a drug test for meldonium. It's an unusual drug for somebody in GAA to test positive for. It's not something that any of us really knew that much about until the whole Maria Sharapova incident a couple of years back. And one of the things that we wanted to find out a little bit was, what's it actually like for a player to be part of an inter-county setup and to face the drug testing regime that you get from Sport Ireland? So we've been talking to various people around the country who were involved in Gaelic games, and I'll give you some of the anonymous stuff that we got back from them in a minute. But former Donegal footballer Eamon McGee is with us to give us his experience. Eamon, good morning to you. How are you doing?
Morning, Ger. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Morning,
We were definitely taken aback yesterday when we found out that it was meldonium, because it's difficult to get your hands on meldonium in Ireland. Anyway, in terms of a level of education, when you were playing, how much did you have to sit through? How much work did you have to do to make sure that you were on top of what was on the banned list and what wasn't?
We wouldn't have done much work now, Jared, to be honest with you. You know, we put our faith in the medical staff and the S&C coaches, and in fairness, they were pretty on the ball. We were blessed with a good medical staff, and anything that could come in, we took was very well checked, and anything you took outside of that, you had to run by the docs. So, you know, in terms of literature, in terms of sitting down and talking, this is what you can take, this is what you can't take, it wouldn't have been, you know, a priority for us. We just put an awful lot of trust in docs and the S&C lads.
And look, that kind of is obviously a system that worked quite well up to, well, it seems to work very well for the best run counties, where you have a medical staff, there's a proper relationship with all the medical staff, and they have those conversations. Mm-hmm. Were you guys taking supplements like as a group? Was it a group-wide kind of, these are the supplements that we take and everybody has to take them, or was it tailored for individuals? Some people needed supplements depending on how they were training. How did that work?
You see, what it was, you know, there was obviously lads that when Jim came in initially, there was lads that would have needed to bulk up a wee bit. And, you know, there's a famous story about Rory Kavanagh taking the 6 dinners a day. But there's also, you know, Rory would have been, you know, a lot of protein shakes. You know, after training, the team as a squad would have had their recovery drinks. And I'd say majority of counties that can afford it are doing that at a minute. But, you know, in terms of taking the supplements, I think they came in 2014, you know, coming to the end of my career. But personally, I was never one for that, but I know a lot of lads would have been on that kind of stuff. And again, it would have been rigorously checked by the medical staff.
So there was a centrally recognised kind of, if anybody is taking supplements, these are the ones that we're taking, and this is the brand, and it would have to be batch tested, all that kind of stuff that would just be...
That's correct, but I also know that, you know, myself included, in 2012, I went off, one of the friends got me a batch of creatine, and, you know, I didn't run that by anybody, so it wasn't checked, and I know a few of the lads are on the same boat, so it was just pure luck of the draw. And in terms of the testing itself, you know, the chances of you getting tested were very low.
How many times did you get tested during your intercounty career?
Never to my recollection. You know, no, I didn't get tested on that. You know, again, that's the thing about it. That the odds of you getting tested are low enough. You know, so if you are of that particular mindset that you want to kind of cheat the system, you would nearly take a chance on it.
Tell me, when you were taking creatine in 2012, why did you take it and how did you get it?
I got it. One of the lads who's very well versed in, you know, sports science affairs, and he sat me down and he sent me an article on creatine and the benefits of it. And, you know, I would have had a few worries about is there kind of negatives to it, and is this dangerous or anything? And he sat me down and he says, no way, there's so much positives and there's so many benefits to your game here that, you know, you'd be crazy not to take it. So, you know, he managed to hit me up with a batch of the stuff, and, you know, I was happy enough to take it. And I don't know, was it psychological or was it, you know, an actual physical benefit of it, but I thought it was good stuff, you know.
Right, and is that just a powder that you mix into a drink and take it in a shaker?
Yeah. So what you do with the creatine is that you would load up on it first for the first week or so, and then you would, you know, gradually, you know, two to three times a day then for a few weeks.
And how long did you feel the benefits of creatine after that? It's about building muscle, is that right, or as opposed to endurance?
It's about building muscle. If you're going to ask me the ins and outs of it now, that basically the sell was, this is going to improve your game. You're going to feel stronger. You're going to be faster. And for me, it wasn't about the strength. It was about the faster part of it. And this is, he sold this package to me, and I was yeah, sign me up to it now. And, you know, obviously I did ask, like, this is all above board, and he says this is checked. This is no bother at all. But the protocol was you go to your backroom team, the medical staff or the S&C lads, and say, listen, I'm taking this. Can you get it checked out for me? But I kind of never really bothered with that.
Why not? As a matter of interest, was that a little kind of wrinkle in the back of your mind going, I should get this checked out with the lads, but actually, you know what, I'm not going to bother. Why didn't you?
Hassle, Jerry. You know, what happens if they were to tell me, say, you know, I'd taken it two weeks into it, and I says, you know, maybe I should go and see the backroom team about it, but you know, there was the conscience wasn't at me or anything. I knew the thing was okay, and I knew it was, you know, I trusted the man's advice and his opinion, but it was just hassle. There was no other reason for it.
Yeah, okay. Well, so not to focus on the specifics of the current case or any other case, but you can see how if there was somebody on a GAA team who had an idea and it wasn't necessarily creatine, it was something else, how a trusted person on the team could suddenly become a conduit for a bunch of other people to be taking stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I can understand that how that happens. You know, when you go back to my earlier example about the creatine, you know, it could have been a bad batch. You know, it could have small chance it could have been a bad batch, and you know, I could have gave that then to other members of the squad, and they could have got unlucky and they could have got tested, and you know, there would have been consequences to that. But I definitely agree with what you're saying here in terms of, you know, that one person can bring in whatever.
It seems as if they've kind of ramped up a little bit the actual amount of expectation on players to take a bit of personal responsibility for this. Now, I don't know how much ramping up they've done. So we had one of the lads ring around various people, and this was all under condition of anonymity, but we heard back from 3 current inter-county players last night, 3 separate counties at different levels, and all 3 of them said that they had to do an online webinar or a quiz at the start of the year. and a couple more from some recently retired former players. A one-off presentation with the usual advice: check everything with your doctor before taking anything. More of a tick-the-box exercise. No real emphasis put on it, in my opinion, but in fairness, the information given was clear. Another one said, a couple of talks over the years and we were told to run everything by the medical team, so you put all your trust in them. And then one meeting a year, totally inadequate considering teams have totally different levels of resources around medical staff, nutritionists, etc. So you've got a good medical team. You could have gone and checked whatever you wanted with them. There are definitely counties who probably don't have the access to the same amount of backroom teams, but there is this online webinar. If you were playing today, Eamon, and I know it's a hypothetical situation, but you're sent a link by WhatsApp saying, here, fill this, go and do this test. It's going to take you half an hour. It'll give you the details on what you can and can't take. We have to trust the players are doing that, or should there be some kind of system where you're not allowed to play until it's proven that you've taken this half-hour test?
County players have a lot on their plate, you know. If the sell is right in terms of if you trust your doctors and you have a good relationship with the medical staff, which we did, if he was to tell me take this quiz or take this questionnaire, then you're going to do it. But you know, it's just a lot of hassle, you know, in my opinion.
And maybe not necessarily that much of a deterrent either. It's I guess the whole point about having a drugs testing regime is to deter people from taking drugs. And I just don't know how it works, right? I don't know how in practice, if I'm inclined to look for an advantage and if I'm inclined to look for some way of cheating the system, I don't know how much this half hour, I suppose it makes me responsible if I do get caught, and maybe that's the way that works.
Yeah, and I think this is the big one. You know, players have to have a level of responsibility. It's primarily on the players. It'll be on the medical staff and, you know, the S&C coaches, but primarily it's going to be on the player. They have to make sure that they're taking the right stuff. And, you know, meldonium, there's this question mark over that straight away for you as a county player and for you being involved in any sport that's going to be drug tested. So, you know, that's going to put alarm bells off straight away. So you have to ask the question, should I be taking this?
Eamon, just to go back to the whole process of testing. So you were never tested during your inter-county career. Did you see testing happen? Did you see teammates getting pulled aside after games to be tested?
Yeah, I think there was example in the All-Ireland final 2012. You know, we were all in Cloud 9 and Christy Toy was pulled aside. And, you know, he couldn't make the bus to the hotel. And, you know, we're obviously fairly annoyed about it now, but most of the Croke Park games, there would have been someone pulled aside and tested, and, you know, you weren't allowed to leave until you produced a sample. And that's fair enough. I'd have no wild complaints about it. You know, we're taking the government grants. The county players are taking the government grants, and we expect a certain level of responsibility on the players end.
And then what about out of competition? Because obviously this case with the Carlow footballer was out of competition testing. Was there ever anybody who visited Donegal training, or did anybody get tested after a training session?
There was, I think off the top of my head, there would be 3 or 4 times that players would be tested at training. They would have landed up at training. And just wait, again, training session was completed. You waited for to produce a sample after the training, and there was fairly run of the mill. I don't think the majority of the lads had any wide problem with it. Mm-hmm. But it was rare, and if you were tempted to go down that route, you would take a chance and with the odds that are there that you're going to be tested.
Was this a topic of discussion amongst inter-county players about the subject of doping? It's a fairly big subject in terms of the wider realms of sport. You'd have all been reading sports media where there are international stories doing the rounds. As athletes yourself, I'm sure there would have been discussions about, God, I wonder, are competitors, for example, indulging in things? Obviously, pure idle speculation, but I'm sure it might have been in your mind.
Yeah, definitely. And as the years went on, as things got more seriously with the supplements and the recovery powder, and you're thinking and you're having these debates, and a lot of county squads will have these big philosophical discussions, to pass the time and the nights away. And we were saying, where's the line? Where does the line stop? And who decides what's good and what's bad? Because the supplements would have been fairly popular amongst the squad, and every county squad's the same. The recovery drinks after training were mandatory. It was frowned if you didn't take any, and that there is a benefit. And, you're receiving a head start. So we discussed about, we chatted about where is that line in terms of what is cheating and when are you on your own, if that makes sense.
And did you come up with an answer for that philosophical question? Was it as simple as whatever's on the band list represents?
No, any good philosophical discussion, there is no answer at the end of it now.
What did you think, though?
I stopped taking the creatine in 2013, and I haven't taken it since. So maybe I did answer that question. I just I had a few discussions with myself and with the friend who recommended it, and it would have been brought into the club in this last few years, and I would have stayed away from it now. But I understand, and I've no bother at all with people taking the stuff. But that there is a part of it that it's not you. You're still getting that helping hand. You're still, and maybe that's naive. Maybe that's a wee bit naive on my part. But they're still getting a head start on someone who doesn't have that creatine.
It kind of feels like it's a little bit of it's a slippery slope, essentially. If I take creatine today, there's a possibility that actually, well, what's the difference between this? So this isn't on the banned list, but I actually feel much better taking it. The stuff that's on the banned list must be supercharging me. Maybe I could take a little bit of that and see how it goes, like particularly in the off season when I know there's no chance of getting tested. Like, is that part of the philosophical question that or debate that kind of comes to the fore?
Yeah, it's definitely, and we laughed. We had this discussion. We laughed as for the lads that were at the wrong end of her career. We says we could possibly squeeze a few more years out of her career if we went down this route. But again, it's something that I don't think many would have taken seriously. But it is that road you can go down, because there is a small chance of you getting tested.
So you can see why people do it.
I can understand 100% why people do it. I can't understand why a Carlow footballer is taking melatonin and worrying about that. But I can see why the successful counties, the counties that are in with a real chance would be taking it for that. Because there's not that much of a percentage in terms of the gap between the Dublin and the Kerry and Tyrone and these boys. So I can understand why someone might be tempted to take it to make up that wee gap.
Yeah, look, it's obviously not a topic that's going to go away anytime soon. But it's always great to talk to you, Eamon. But that was really interesting, just the fact that these conversations are happening at between squads and those long dark nights away where you're trying to recover and the box sets aren't that good.
No, well, this was probably pre-Netflix, before Netflix is a big thing now. So hopefully them discussions are still happening, because they're always fruitful.
Good stuff, Eamon. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Thanks, boys. See you there now.
Right. You can get us here on 0879 180 180. And obviously, just to reiterate, of course, that the Cardiff footballer in question says he doesn't know how the meldonium got into his system. He says it was taken inadvertently, but has yet to come out and explain exactly how it did get there too. So, right, as part of our Champions League Memories series in association with Virgin Media Sports, Stewie Byrne talked us through his memories of Shelbourne's clash with the mighty Deportivo La Coruña in Lansdowne Road in 2004. As a Virgin Media TV customer, you can now enjoy classic weekends of sport packed with some of the most memorable wins, losses, triumphs and upsets, all on Virgin Media Sport. Have a look.
it actually gave you that little bit of a lift, to be quite honest. And I think we knew we'd get a good crowd for it, like, because we played Hajduk, I think it might have been on the Tuesday, and we had I think it was probably 8 days to prepare for the Deportivo game, and things just went into the stratosphere. Like, we had Sky Sports News following us around for the week. You know, it just went bonkers. It went completely bonkers. Like, it just Irish television. It was probably nearly on the sports news every day. And we were training in Rossmini at the time, and anyone who knows Drumcondra and Talca Park, Rossmini is kind of clerical land, just literally about sort of 300 metres up the road, up Grace Park Road there.
Yes, I know it. Yeah.
Lion School's in there. My son actually goes to school there, but we were training in there, and so what we would do was we would get dressed in Talca, walk up, and train, and then on the way back they'd be selling tickets for the game, and there would be people from Talca all the way down Richmond Road, down to as far as the eye could see, nearly into Ballybock. Like, it was just scary, and people would stop and talk to you, and they would talk to you about the game, and you kind of knew then. Pat made a very good point, and I think all the players are very much in agreement that was as close as footballers in Ireland would come to, let's say, playing in the Premiership or playing at that level. Like, that constant attention, that people watching your every move. You just knew that you were part of something really, really big.
Yeah, it finished 0-0, one of the great nights of Irish football history at Lansdowne Road, the old Lansdowne Road. What a great stadium that was for those games. More from Stewie Byrne available wherever you get your podcast. The best place is the Go Loud app, or indeed on offtheball.com. It was great stuff there. And let's go back to the big story that has kind of, when you're piecing together the back pages, that there is a kind of fairly consistent theme emerging, and that is the concern that most sports have about when it's going to be safe to re-establish contact sports. And I'm delighted to say we've got Professor Sam McConkey with us this morning to talk to us about this. Sam, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Morning. I'm not bad, thanks. I'm just hoping my technology stays working while we're talking.
Okay, well, we'll do our best. The Premier League scenario at the moment, they have Operation Restart, which is their ambition to try and get the games back behind closed doors and finish off last season's league campaign. There's a few different ways that they intend to do this. One is to try and protect the players, kind of bubble them a little bit and keep them in a form of group quarantine in hotels, and then go and play matches and come back to the hotels. And everybody's like, oh, that seems to make a lot of sense if you can do it. The NBA have talked about doing something fairly similar. They would have much smaller teams, so it might be more achievable with basketball than with the Premier League. But I guess the real question is, how safe is it for players to play against each other in a contact sport, and to stand in walls and defend free kicks, or to push each other over in the penalty box? That's the kind of thing that people are finding difficult to get their heads around. Do you have any ideas around that, or any suggestions around that?
Yeah, my view is that as long as both teams are doing what you've just described, which is a really good cocoon bubble around them, then you can merge those two bubbles temporarily, and that's a safe thing to do technically, as long as both teams are really in an effective bubble for the previous 14 days. Okay, so the contact, the transmission risk isn't from the actual contact happening on the field of play. It's the transmission within the communities that these two teams have existed in up to that point. Exactly. So if neither team has any coronavirus COVID-19 on their body or on that team, then they won't share it with somebody else. So as long as you're sure that the team you're playing is coronavirus free, then you can get involved with them. And as I said, see it like two bubbles temporarily merging. And as long as the space within the two bubbles is coronavirus free, then that will remain so, even though the two free bubbles merge. Think of like two bubbles in the bath that merge together and touch. Those two bubbles are still, they're intact bubbles, even though they've touched. And then perhaps, I know it's hard to separate bubbles in the bath, so my metaphor breaks down, but those teams would then have to separate and then maybe merge with another bubble the next week when they're playing a different team. The other model, of course, that I'd like to celebrate is the one in New Zealand. I'm sorry to say here, we all hate the New Zealanders because they're so good at rugby and so good at sailing. And they're our nemesis. They are the best in the world at these sports, and they're really good at it. And they have beaten us in this. They've got all of New Zealand, almost New Zealand free, coronavirus free. So they're now one big bubble, and they're hoping Australia is going to do the same, and then they're hoping that they'll be able to play back and forth with Australia, rugby, soccer, every sport, and sailing. So another alternative for the UK and for Ireland is to follow New Zealand, follow Australia, eliminate all of COVID-19 from the whole country.
I've seen people say that we can't do that because New Zealand is an island so far away from the other islands, and our island is so close to Europe, and we're such a throughput for global traffic from our airports and our ports. Is that true, or what's your view on that?
My view is that those are relative objections and problems. We would have to get the folk in Northern Ireland to agree with us and to participate with us in the bubble, and potentially also people in Britain, in London and England to do the same thing. That is possible. It's possible that the people in England might join us and might say, yes, our trajectory so far in this COVID-19 has been horrible. We've had 40 or 50,000 deaths in London. It's been very ugly, very unpleasant. The health services in London were overwhelmed. They were building a lot of special beds in a big shed somewhere in London. And that's been an unpleasant, violently unpleasant problem for London. So they may change the tune and say, no, let's look at New Zealand, look at Australia. So it would involve in working together with our partners. I think that the Europeans, we can control, not prevent flights into Ireland, but actually quarantine people. That's what the New Zealanders are doing. 2 weeks in quarantine in the airport before you can walk the streets of Dublin.
Is it too late for us to do that, or could we actually change tack now and decide that that's what our future holds?
We could change tack now. The Chinese in Wuhan did this. Even whenever the virus had gone completely chaotic in Hubei province, 55 million people, and Wuhan city of 11 million people, the Chinese were able to reverse things and bring it down. It would mean, ironically, tightening our current social control measures right now, but maybe only for 4 to 6 weeks. We'd all be wearing masks, and we'd have a shorter duration of tighter measures. We might end up using our mobile phones for contact tracing. Maybe we'd have to give away some of our personal privacy that we all cherish on our mobile phone. But the idea would be eliminated and then have a shorter period of more intense restrictions rather than 6 or 12 months or many years of milder restrictions. So I think there are strategic choices here that really have to be made at political level, and we would have to lobby the leaders in Belfast and London to join us on that, because as you said, it's not a journey we can take alone as half an island. We need all of our island involved.
Those ideas, right? What you're talking about there, is that being spoken about in the corridors of power, right? Is that happening? Is that conversation happening with the CMO and the Department of Health and the Department of Finance? Like, are you aware that those conversations are happening, I suppose, is the question I'm asking.
They definitely are happening. And the challenge is, of course, getting the good people in Northern Ireland, first of all, to agree with each other as one cohesive public policy unit for Northern Ireland, and then, of course, secondarily, to agree with us. And that challenge of helping people in Northern Ireland to trust each other and to trust us to work together through this is, as you alluded to earlier, quite a big challenge. It's not a simple, straightforward thing, and it's not something they have a traditional legacy of. They have a legacy of, distrust and not cooperating. But I think we've seen small steps to that improving in the last few weeks. We've seen a memorandum of understanding. We've seen a meeting of the North-South Ministerial Body. We're recognising the Belfast Agreement and working with Britain. We've worked with Britain in many EU areas very successfully. Often our position in the European Union has been shared with Britain. Obviously not the Brexit one, but lots of other ones before that. So there's been a lot of traditional working together of the leaders in Britain and Ireland over the years. So I think that certainly has been talked about, but it's not an easy one, unfortunately.
Sam, just to go back to your point about the two bubbles, how absurd an idea is it to get involved in sport in the next 6 to 12 months without those two bubbles existing? We're talking about amateur sports here where people would have to go to work and then go into training. Obviously, there's no possible way of creating that solid bubble, as you mentioned. Is that truly the last thing we can hope for at this point, especially when it comes to the likes of the GAA, that people who have to go to work really can't partake in competitive sport?
Yeah, I'm really sorry to say. I personally can't see a way to do that safely at this point in time now. If we'd almost down to no cases or almost no cases in Ireland, so if we were in a near elimination stage For example, if every case in Ireland was known how they got it from. So I live in a household with 2 others. If one of them were to get COVID-19 and then I got it, that's an explained case. We know there's a lot of household transmission, and it's not news if somebody else in a household gets COVID-19 from somebody else that they live with. So that known case of transmission is much less worrying than cases just popping up here and there unexpectedly, where the transmission patterns are out of control and unknown. So I feel if we were in even a near elimination or control stage, then perhaps if we knew that there were no cases going on in the team members of Team A and Team B, and in their families and their households and in their coaching staff and their support staff, then perhaps with a little bit of risk, we'd all accept that there would be maybe some risk of doing it, but with some risk, you could potentially get back to doing some team sports. I think each sport is a bit different. Some, like hockey, where you have a stick and you're not really supposed to hit the other person and even tackle them, are a bit easier, whereas others like hurling and rugby, where you're actually getting up close and personal, if you like, and that's part of the whole sport, that you're physically engaged with the other person's body, are more challenging.
So there is elements of the contact sport which we also have to take into account. It's not as black and white as saying it's just being in contact generally with other human beings. It is actually the nature of the sport as well. So you've almost got a two-pronged approach here, and I guess one of these questions is kind of more of a philosophical question for the GAA more than anybody else, just about the possibility of bringing it back without people who must go to work. I'm sure people could possibly work remotely within the confines of a hotel, for example, if that was what they were going to lock down. The other question I have is just about gatherings at these events, Sam, and this is obviously something that is way down the line. I'm not for 1 second suggesting that this is something that we're looking at in the short term, but like a lot of GAA grounds we look at in the country possibly have capacities of less than the magic number of 5,000 people. Social distancing at sports events, is that in the same bracket as what we've just spoken about, as something that is just an absurd idea in the next 6 to 12 months?
So I think it's possible that we could have social events where people are spaced out by 3 or 4 meters. So many of our grounds have a lot of seats, but there's only a quarter of them full. So it's possible to block off every third seat or every second seat, or 2 seats and then one space for people to sit. So people could actually sit separated from each other. You could, of course, sit beside people you live with because you're already in the same bubble with them. But my view is that having spectator sports, or even a church venue or a music venue or a concert where you have people spaced out, or a lecture theatre or a school, a primary school or a college, where people are spaced out by 2 or 3 meters, and perhaps wearing masks would be a first step, rather than just saying we can't do any of these large gatherings. So I think it would be a challenge around the entry points, the exit points, the pinch points, the crowd control. But many of us have thought about these things and looked at ways to manage those safely as well. And then even things like bars where people are, I'm thinking of all of us crowding up 6 deep at a bar to try and get a drink, as we've all done. I'm not sure that's the antithesis of social distancing. So that's a real challenge. I know the Scandinavians in Sweden are doing open bars, but I'd point out to your listeners, unfortunately, they have a pint is about €10 there. So people typically have 1 pint and drink it rather slowly and soberly, and then go home while more or less sober after 1 or at most 2 pints. So their idea of drinking is quite different from our idea of drinking, because they're sitting at tables, it's table service, and it's outrageously expensive. So it's not our idea of how you go drinking, if you like. So I think you'd have to have some modifications, but my view is that every sports code should be starting to work on those details and ask, as there's a gradual lifting and a stepwise easing of restrictions in Ireland, as I hope and expect there will be, how can we try to do as much as possible, even in some modified form? And even people going to work, it depends what work you do. Famously, I've said, the person on the building site who goes up the crane to be in the little glass box at the top of the crane to control the crane driver on a little radio. That's the definition of social distancing. They're 100 meters up above everyone else. So different jobs have different elements of risk with them, and some much less than others.
Look, the risk is the whole question here. It's what is our appetite for risk as a society, to the point where we feel like our health system is going to be able to deal with whatever the new cases are. So if we don't follow the course of New Zealand, and it doesn't look likely at the moment that we're about to announce a deeper lockdown. What is our graduated return to sport or to pubs or to whatever life looks like next?
So it will be lower risk things first. The lower risk things are things that are outside in the open air where the sun and the wind dilutes the virus, and things in the open air where you can stay 2 or 3 meters apart. So I'd be reasonably positive about things like longer walks, about cycling, the cycling competition, even where people dress up in their lycra and go cycling around the country. They're inevitably a few meters away from each other because they don't want to crash into each other. Things like, I'm man-biased, my sport is sailing, so I'd like to see single-handed sailing like Annalise Murphy, who won a gold medal in Rio in a single-handed boat, because you're on your own. And part of sailing is staying away from other boats. If you bang into other boats, you get penalised. You have to do a 720 turn, which slows you down a lot. So the whole idea of sailing is there's a right of way and one must stay away. Similarly, golf, of course. So those and single-handed tennis. So those sports where you're on your own, you're not close to other people, and you're competing in the outdoors are likely to be the first sports to come back. Then there'll be a period of waiting, 4 to 6 weeks, to see, has anything changed? Have we got away with that? Has that been safe? And are our sensitivity of our testing and contact tracing adequate to detect any change in the state of COVID-19 in Ireland? And then there'll be another relaxation, and we'll be going through a series of stepwise relaxations, I hope, gradually, with a 4 to 6 week window between each of them. Unfortunately, at one stage, probably we'll get it wrong, and COVID-19 will rise up its ugly head from something that we did that we probably shouldn't have in retrospect. You don't know that until you're there yet. This has happened in Singapore, where they relaxed things, and then unfortunately they had large hostels for migrant construction workers where they hadn't been keeping a close eye on it, and the COVID-19 went rampant there and then spread into the general population. So there have been other examples of when it's come back. In China, it's come back in a very small way, but it's migrants coming in from Russia, Chinese workers who were working in Russia and unfortunately caught COVID-19 in Russia and then moved into China, and they were kept in quarantine, so they were restricted, but they then turned out to have COVID-19 from incoming migrants or incoming Chinese people who are returning from their travels abroad. So I see this as a series of stepwise relaxations and then keeping a close surveillance eye. But my view is that every sport, as I said, needs to start contingency managing. What could we do? Could we start training? Could we start outdoor training where people are 3 meters away from each other safely? And that's likely to be the first sort of thing to start.
Okay, that's really interesting, because there's been a call from a fairly high up official in the GAA to write this year off and start planning for next year. But actually, the right thing to do is to bide your time and to see 4 to 6 week periods, take each 4 to 6 week period and see what progress we make in terms of getting the retransmission rate down. Because if that falls below a certain number, at that point, then there will be a risk, and we'll have to decide whether or not we have an appetite to accept that risk or not.
Yeah, and there might also be a different rate in different counties. So the rates of COVID-19 right now are more in Dublin, as I'm sure you know. There's been a lot of cases in Dublin, obviously with the big population, but some of the parts of rural Ireland have been relatively spared. So it may be that the risks are very, very different in different parts of our country. So it's possible, I'm sure the Kerry men would love this, but it's possible we could be playing sport in Kerry when the Dubliners are still locked up. I know that's probably very divisive and very unpopular, but at a technical level, it's conceivable that there may be ongoing transmission in the big urban centre that's Dublin, while the rural, less populous, more remotely, sparsely populated counties are actually up and running. I'm sure the people would love that as well. But that's a possible future as well.
That's remarkable, Sam. Like, that's something that, Ger, I think actually you floated that idea as well. And I don't think we were quite sure if this was actually something that you could actually put forward as a real idea. Because, again, just to go back to the GAA point, John Horan mentioned that the club game is where he would be looking to restart sport once things are safe to get back up and running. But not only that, you could stagger it on a geographical basis, that, as you say, the Western Seaboard could actually see their county games start back up, and that Dublin would perhaps be a month or further behind.
Yeah, That's already happened in Italy. In Milan, the restrictions were much different from other parts of Italy. And also in China, the restrictions in Wuhan and Hubei were started earlier and lasted longer than the restrictions in other parts of China. So other countries like Italy and China have done that differential type of restrictions and differential timing of relaxation of restrictions. At a public health level, it can become challenging because you end up then with a different message for different groups of people. And while people understand it, they may feel, oh, why should we in Louth not follow the countryside rather than having to follow Dublin? So people start to question the messages whenever it gets lots of differentials, and maybe there's a risk of getting less buy-in, less cooperation, less working together, less cohesion when you start to divide us up in different groups. We've already done that for people over 70, as you know. The over 70s are now supposed to stay in their house completely, whereas those of us under 70 who have good immune systems can move around. So it is possible to make the message more subtle and more specific, and at a technical level, that's a reasonable way out of this.
Last question for you, and you've been great with your time. Do you think it's more likely or less likely that we'll have Premier League action, for example, if they decided that they had a way to cocoon the players, that it would actually be safe for them to do that, and that it would be possible in 6 weeks' time or 7 weeks' time for us to have some football behind closed doors in England?
Yeah, I think that's technically possible. If you get a hotel with 100 people that's sealed off, the chefs, the coaches, the exercise physiotherapists and the team players and the subs, obviously, all cocooned in one cocoon for 14 days with maybe some testing, maybe test their nose and see if they're clear, then potentially to play another team that's done exactly the same behind closed doors. It seems to be at a technical level that's achievable if you do a really good cocoon, as long as you've a good seal around the cocoon and you've nobody going in and out through that. Nobody's sneaking out at night. It's like secondary school where you sneak out at night to go home to have a party at night. So the people would have to actually follow the rules, as you realise. It doesn't really work if one person comes in with COVID-19. Then it becomes like, have you seen all these cruise ships? The Diamond Princess and several other ones. Once one person with it gets into that cocoon, then the cocoon is a disaster because the whole thing just spreads through it. So you'd have to avoid a Diamond Princess, or I think there was a US Navy ship, the Roosevelt, that also had the same problem. So you really don't want to turn a protective cocoon into a floating cruise ship. But if you can avoid anyone coming into it with COVID-19, that I think is a way forward. And they have an awful lot of money. As we all know, the Premier League is ridiculously wealthy. So the actual economic cost of paying for a hotel and some nice chefs and so on is well within their financial reach.
Yeah, it makes sense for them to do so because it puts the money tap back on as well. Professor Sam McConkey from the RCSI, thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Thanks.
It was really fascinating stuff there, and a little bit of hope as well, I think, for people who are involved in GAA, that this might be possible to step things up over a period of time, obviously with the caveat that things need to be improving, and it'll be interesting to see what new lockdown measures, either increase in the lockdown measures or decrease in the lockdown measures, are announced next week after the bank holiday weekend. 9:03 for you here this morning. We'll be picking the best 15 of the professional era from an Ireland perspective with Neil Treacy in a couple of minutes' time. But we are also every day asking a bunch of Ireland's top sports people how's the head throughout this unprecedented situation. We'd also love to know what you're doing to stay sane and healthy. You can send your comments to us on Twitter or WhatsApp. It's 0879 180 180. Irish Paralympic swimmer Nicole Turner is this morning's guest. Here she is talking to Will O'Callaghan.
To be honest, it's getting that bit easier for me. Like, obviously, so when lockdown did first start, when Leo actually announced the closures of the school, the NAC up in Dublin actually closed. But at that time, Tokyo, the Olympic and Paralympics were still going ahead in September. So the National Aquatic Centre, they still let the Olympians and Paralympians come in and train. So we did that for 2 weeks, and then that's when they announced the postponement of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So then that's when we stopped training. And to be honest, the first week was horrible. So I went out and bought myself a bike, so I'd go out on the bike every day. But like for me personally, like obviously with me swimming up in Dublin, I'd be gone out of the house for about 7 hours of the day, whereas I'd only be out on the bike for about an hour. So it was pretty boring and pretty daunting being in the house that long. But as the time, obviously I've been out nearly 6 weeks now. So as that time's gone on, it's got much easier. swimming's the one sport, like, I'd be in the pool 6 days a week, and then I'd have Sunday off. Whereas I went from being in the pool 6 days a week to being in the pool no days of the week. And yeah, it is like I'm not one, I can't build a swimming pool in my backyard, and I can't go, like, the only option I'd have is going in a river, and to be honest, I don't want to face that. So yeah, it is pretty weird, and I am very excited to get back to swimming whenever that may be. It didn't actually hit me it only hit me about 2 weeks ago, because I was in a unique position that I actually took a year at school to train for Tokyo, because obviously I'm in Cláisiúin and I train up in Dublin 6 days a week, and 5 of them days is Monday to Friday. It's 5 to 7 in the evening. So I actually finished school 40 minutes early before I finished school. I missed the last class of the day to obviously get to training for 5 o'clock. But then obviously when I was going into 5th year, that wasn't possible to do. So for me to perform my best at Tokyo, I took the year off school. And then, yeah, it was just, like, it didn't really hit me until about 2 weeks ago. And it is pretty, like, there is a negative side, but I just kind of have to take the positive side. It is an extra year to train. I've always been one that, like, school, it obviously is very important. But I've always been one to I always prioritize swimming over school, because I kind of told myself, my swimming's not going to last forever. Whereas I can always go back in 10, 20 years' time and do whatever I wanted to do now in terms of my education. See, I get out on the bike about 2 hours a day. And then I'm fortunate enough, so back in, I'd say it was about 2015, my parents actually built a gym in the back of our house in a shed. So I still have I have a good bit of gym equipment. And so I can still do my gym 3 times a week. But other than that, walking my dogs, I'm not one of them who's addicted to Netflix. So yeah, walking my dogs, and I've started baking a little.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Who's your favourite superhero?
The OTB Kids Takeover. We're giving the stuck-at-home kids of Ireland a chance to interview some of the biggest stars in Irish sport.
Would you ever mistake the ball for something? Like, would you ever think a player has a ball but is actually the other player?
That's a great question, Dara. Yeah, I had really bad eyesight as a kid.
You guys can ask them anything from what pajamas they wear to who's your favourite superhero.
Just go with, like, Superman.
All you've got to do is video your kids asking the question. Just get them to introduce themselves first, and then WhatsApp it to 0879 180 180. That's 0879 180 180. And don't forget to turn your phone on its side and shoot those videos in landscape mode, please.
What's your favourite stadium that you played in?
It's the OTB Kids Takeover, all week across the Off the Ball channels.
OTB AM.
And speaking of the Kids Takeover, it's happening this week. We're giving the stuck-at-home kids of Ireland a chance to interview some of the biggest stars in Irish sport. And this week, it's Simon Zebo. So this is going to be good crack. He's obviously in lockdown in Paris at the moment. You can ask him anything. All you got to do is video your kids asking the questions, get them to introduce themselves first, and WhatsApp the video to 0879 180 180, 0879 180 180. And ideally the videos would be in landscape mode. Now, Neil Treacy is here with us. He is going to unveil his Ireland team of the professional era, position by position, and then we're going to put it on screen at the end to review it. So, you are a front rower, Neil, right?
I am, yeah.
So this front row will be unimpeachable. You are going to do the right thing and pick the best front row, and there will be no debate about this. I'm confident that this is your area of expertise, Neil, and you're not going to let us down. Don't let us down, Neil.
There will be debate about it.
Let's go.
I hope there isn't.
Come on. There will be debate about this, I guarantee you. Come on, let's go.
Right, I'll start in number 1 shirt, loose head prop. So the contenders for that one, Peter Clousey, Marcus Horan, Cian Healy, and probably Jack McGrath sneaking in as a contender as well. I think I had to go Cian Healy though. 98 caps. He has just been since 2009 when he broke through with Leinster,
and winning the Heineken Cup to coming through with Ireland. He has just been absolutely sensational. He was the first kind of the real modern props that Ireland had, that he was a proper ball carrier, and he was incredibly physical. He wasn't just a guy that was going to eat ruck and doing the nuts and bolts of the scrums and line out. And I think what he probably deserves enormous amount of credit for as well is because of the injuries he's had. He's almost had 2 careers in this one career. So he had up until 2014-15 when he had those really, really bad injuries. And like he's been on record as saying a few times that it's almost been, he was very, very close to signing those retirement papers back in 2015 in that summer when he had the nerve damage that kind of was restricting the use of his hand. And to come back, and he was struggling on the bench for a while with Ireland, trying to get in past Jack McGrath. But the last couple of years, he's been pretty much back to his best. So I thought he was an absolute lock there, and he is going to pass his 100 caps.
The Richie McCaw battering in a game that ultimately we lose, but like that was just that
is the iconic one. I think 2013 was his year as well. He was really unlucky to get that injury on the Lions tour, because at that stage he probably was the best loosehead prop in the world. I'll go on to hooker. It was probably a straight shootout here between Rory Best and Keith Wood. I've just about given it to Keith Wood though, for a couple of reasons. First of all, he was a World Player of the Year. Like, that for a starter should be enough to get you onto this team. He was the inaugural World Player of the Year in rugby, and I think he was the first of the real Irish professional rugby players. He was like a standard setter for the rest of that crop coming through in the early 2000s, who were seeing what Keith Wood was doing, having come back to Ireland. And I think the standards he had picked up in the Premiership in England had pretty much drove on a lot of players in those early 2000s. So I think for the legacy of him, the standards he set when he came back, and the fact that he was absolutely sensational on those Lions tours as well, particularly 2001 down in Australia.
I think that Rory Best's career is one of the best Irish rugby careers of all time because of the big games that he played in and the honours that he won. But if you're spreading that out over a long period of time, it's a sensational achievement to have gone as long as he did at the level that he did. But Keith Wood's highs were, I think, probably forgotten about in some places, like absolutely sensational. There's a footage from that game in his last World Cup against Argentina where he's just so fast. Like he had a pace. He had as much pace as anybody else has ever had in the front row from an Ireland perspective, as well as everything else that he had around the park as well. So I think I can endorse this one.
Yeah, skillful as well. He was prone to an odd kick as well, and they were generally decent enough kicks.
So, sometimes.
Tight head. This was actually a really, really difficult one because there were.
You got it wrong, don't worry.
I have 4 contenders here, and I think each of them makes a pretty solid argument to get in there. So Paul Wallace, John Hayes, Mike Ross, and Tyg Furlong. I've just about given it to John Hayes, but I'm willing to listen to other arguments on this. For John Hayes, the reason I've put him in here, so he was pretty much immovable in that Irish team for the better part of a decade. First Irish player ever to reach 100 caps, which is just an absolutely outstanding achievement, I think.
Was he ever the best? Was he ever the best tight head in the world?
He probably wasn't, but he was playing tight head at a time when the job of the tight head was just nuts and bolts work. It was get out there, scrummage your arse off, work yourself in the line, make your lifts in the line out, and he was absolutely brilliant at that. I don't think he was the absolute most talented player. I don't think he probably wasn't getting into an All Blacks team, for example, but I'm just about giving it to him. I think within a few years, Tyg Furlong's going to be in a position where we'd probably maybe be talking about him over John Hayes. They're 2 very, very different types of player. And even someone like Paul Wallace has his merits that, that 1997 Lions tour, he was absolutely sensational. Coming through as one of the early crop of professional rugby players as well. And Mike Ross was probably the most consistent scrummager that Ireland have probably ever had. I'm just about giving it to John Hayes, though. for his longevity.
It's your team, Neil. It's your team, but you got this one wrong. That's fine.
I don't know.
It's okay. I mean, you're entitled to be wrong. It's a free country, but Tadhg Furlong is the winner here. Like, because the high heights, and I don't know. I still think Tadhg Furlong has a second act to come in his career, in much the same way that we've seen from Cian Healy. So, like, if Tadhg Furlong's career was to end now, the fact that he was in that Lions team and I don't know. I just think that
he was the best player in his position in the world. Like, that for me is for me there was no debate about hooker. Keith Wood was World Player of the Year. Like, absolutely no. That is the only criteria you need. Much less the fact that he was the best hooker in the world at that point. I think it's largely accepted that Tadhg Furlong has been the best player in the world in his position, and if John Hayes didn't achieve that, then Tadhg Furlong beats John Hayes to the position. But as Jura says, it is your team.
Wait, just two quick questions for you. Where are you from, Neil?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Look, cards on the table. There are a lot of people at home in Limerick that I do have to keep happy. I'm going to have to go down to Limerick at some point. At some point when all of this COVID-19 is blown over, I will have to show my face in Limerick at some point again. So look, forgive me for that.
Okay, so the big winner of coronavirus is Neil not having to go back to Limerick to face them, having not put John Hayes in the team. So he puts John Hayes in the team and he can go back whenever he wants.
Exactly.
Okay, second row here. What have we got?
So contenders for second row, I jotted down from James Ryan right now, Devin Toner, Donegal O'Callaghan, Paul O'Connell, Malcolm O'Kelly. The two I went for, Malcolm O'Kelly and Paul O'Connell. I think Paul O'Connell was an absolute lock. I think it's Paul O'Connell and one other. What's that?
Pun intended.
Paul O'Connell, an absolute lock in the team.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were referring to the and one other part. I wasn't even getting what I'd said. But yeah, Malcolm O'Kelly is the one that I went for alongside Paul O'Connell. 92 caps. At one point, he was Ireland's record caps holder when he made his 70th appearance. Probably as good as any player Ireland have had in the line-out as well over the last 20, 25 years. And I think very, very skillful.
Well, the pass.
Excellent handling. The pass for the O'Driscoll try in Paris. Yeah. I remember we were talking about it on the Classic Game Club as well, but I just thought he was an absolutely outstanding player. And I think had it not been for an injury, maybe he would have got test caps in the 2005 Lions series. Do I even really need to go into Paul O'Connell too much? I think it's just an absolute certainty that he's wearing the number 5 shirt in that team.
We'll come back to this question. It hasn't been answered because there's no C beside anybody, but we'll come back to who actually gets the captain, because there's a lot of Lions potentials here. The back row is, I think, going to be relatively contentious, but it shouldn't be. I'm largely in agreement with what you've done here. So 6, 7 and 8. Let's take 6 and 7 as combined, because there are some players who might have been able to play. Hang on a second, I've just spotted somebody missing. So let's go. 6 and 7 together. Who is in and who was left out erroneously?
Yeah, so who has gone in for me are Stephen Ferris and David Wallace are the two that are in there for me. So for Stephen Ferris, I'm putting him at number 6. I know he only had 35 caps for Ireland, but his career was absolutely robbed. I was looking back through him last night, and I think he's 34 now. If you think about it, he retired in the summer of 2014. He should really only be wrapping up his career maybe this year or next year or something along those lines. If we're talking World Cup cycles, maybe he was kind of going at the end of this season or something like that. This should be the point where we're celebrating the absolutely outstanding career that Stephen Ferris had. When he was fit, he was absolutely unplayable. You think back to the 2011 World Cup when he just, picked up Will Guinea and literally just carried him back into his own 22, and the entire Irish team piled up on top of him. But he was just as physical a player, I think, as Ireland have had, and a complete all-rounder as well. David Wallace, I used to just love the way David Wallace carried the ball. An unbelievable ball carrier, and not just power, but he was slippery and evasive. There were guys there were guys literally just kind of falling off the tackles. He wasn't bouncing people back. He was kind of running around them and just sliding off them. A 2-time line as well in 2001, 2005 as well. I think it has to be mentioned. Who have I screwed over here, Ger?
Sean O'Brien.
Peter O'Mahony.
Yeah, he was. Both of them were on the list of contenders. I had Simon Easterby and Dennis Leamy, Peter O'Mahony, Sean O'Brien on the list of contenders as well for flanker.
Can we just go, you've gone for Donegal All-Ireland and Peter O'Mahony on your bench as opposed to, say, James Ryan and Sean O'Brien?
Yeah, with James Ryan, I think his story is only starting. I was actually deliberate about not putting James Ryan in. He's only been on the scene less than 3 years in professional rugby. I think give it another 3 years, he's pretty much going to be a lock in with the trajectory he's going at, he should be a lock in a Greatest Irish professional 15. I was just reluctant to put him in because I think there is so much more to come. What we have seen has been absolutely brilliant, but there is way more to come. And who was the other one you mentioned there? Sorry.
And Sean O'Brien not being on the bench instead of Peter O'Mahony, or not in the starting team, I'd imagine, is what Ger would have wanted here. That's it's a big call.
Yeah, I don't know. It was an incredibly tight goal. Tight head flanker and winger were incredibly difficult to split. I think you're talking fine hairs between Ferris and O'Brien. There's probably a little bit of Munster bias coming in there with Peter O'Mahony on my bench. The bench I just threw together last night when I was listening out the names in my head. But Sean O'Brien's outstanding. And bit like Ferris as well. The last few years of his career have been
a 6 or 7
injuries as well.
As a 6 or 7, so you're putting Sean O'Brien in as a 6. I mean, is he not also pushing hard / pushing David Wallace out of the team?
Oh, he's pushing. He's close to edging either one of them out of the team. But I think Ferris and David Wallace for me are just about taking it.
Okay.
Number 8.
The backlash. You do live in Dublin, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Okay, it'll just be interesting to see what happens. That's all. Number 8.
Well, look through the team at the end. Leinster have a fair old representation.
Sean O'Brien's not in your 23 of best art. Sean O'Brien's potentially first name on the team sheet in terms of I want to win this game. Everybody else will help me, but Sean O'Brien's gone straight down. Sean O'Brien was the one that the All Blacks used to go, that Sean O'Brien guy, he's really good, isn't he? They didn't say that with anybody else on our team. They were like, we recognise game, and they recognise Sean O'Brien. Look, I love David Wallace. This is not a knock on David Wallace. It's just that
for David Wallace, I'll just say as well, there was a real everything Wallace seemed to do just had this effortless look about it. There was this really, really casual look to the way he played that it automatically jumped out at you. He just looked incredibly laid back out on the pitch. And I think when someone looks that kind of cool and collected about the way they're going about things, it makes it look so much easier. Like someone like Ferris and Sean O'Brien and Peter O'Mahony as well, everything they do is like grunt, blood and thunder. It's 100-mile-an-hour stuff. Whereas I thought with David Wallace, he kind of glided around the pitch a little bit, which just has its own grace.
So the whole aim of this team, Neil, is just to rock up and look nice. Who cares about the results as long as the players...
We're going to have amazing jerseys as well. Mark my words.
Okay. I'm interested in the jersey. Okay, let's go on. Number 8.
Number 8...
contenders.
It's a straight shootout between Anthony Foley and Jamie Heaslip, but I think you have to give it to Jamie Heaslip. A complete rugby player, I think, is what you'd almost call Jamie Heaslip. Skillful, like ball handling ability to kind of run and pass. He had power. He was a brilliant carrier. Robbed of his 100 caps. I think he hit 95 or something before he got that injury that ultimately took the last couple of years of his career. And it was a pretty sad way for someone like Heaslip to go as well, because up until that point, he was known as a guy that just didn't get injured. He was always there and he was always available. 2 Lions tours as well in 2009 and 2013, and was a key part in both of those as well.
You get caps for the Lions, don't you? They count. The test caps count.
You do?
So he made 100, 95 plus 5.
Oh yeah, I was talking about the 95 for Ireland.
Do you get into the Centurion Club? Do they is that like a sorry you can't come in? You had 95 plus 5. No, we can't do the maths. Does that work? I don't know.
I don't know the strict rules. I think you only find out the rules once you've been allowed in. So I'll be waiting a while before they allow me in there. But he was a brilliant player. I look back to the 2009 Grand Slam season, the try he scored against France, where he just pops up in midfield and sidesteps. I can't even remember who that French full back was. Might have been Clement Poitrenaud or something like that, and running in under the posts. He was just brilliant. And you look at the trophies he's picked up in his career as well. What, three Six Nations titles, 3 Heineken Cup titles with Leinster as well. Just an absolutely class player.
Sensational in the Grand Slam year in 09 as well, like that try, as you said. Go on. Halfbacks.
Scrum half. So Peter Stringer and Conor Murray, I think, are the 2 real contenders. You can give an honourable mention to Tomás O'Leary as well, who would have been a key member of the 09 Grand Slam squad as well. But, it pretty much is a straight shootout between Stringer and Conor Murray. I've gone for Conor Murray, though. I know I've been reluctant to pick players who are still playing at the moment, but I think Conor Murray, like someone like Cian Healy, who I mentioned earlier, he almost changed the role that the way scrum half was viewed over the last decade or so. And once he really established himself as an Ireland player, maybe a year after his debut in 2012, he's pretty much been first choice guaranteed for Ireland. Between 2014 and 2018, he was very much in the discussion of the top 2 or 3 scrum halves in the world. I would say for all of for 2017 and 18, he probably was the best scrum half in the world, ahead of Aaron Smith. And
no
in
complaints.
terms of,
I would have given Owen Redden a shout just for like the success that he had at Wasps
certainly as well. Actually, that was a bit unfair to leave him out as well. A good Limerick man as well.
I'm surprised that,
even though he wore blue
and every other colour. Go on.
Sorry. I'll go on, Neil. I'll jump in a sec. I was just going to say that if you're saying that Tadhg Furlong's story has yet to be written, are you
for
right
out half? So, Ronan O'Gara.
Neil's line has got a bit dodgy there. Make your point there, Eoin, and I'll try and put myself in Neil's shoes and defend him.
No, this is very much a point for Neil. If Tadhg Furlong has been left out because his story has yet to be fully written, I think that's some variation of what he said. Is he thereby writing Conor Murray's career off right now by including him?
That's a bit harsh, but I think that Murray's like older than Tadhg Furlong. Murray's 31 and Furlong's only 27. There's like
I am being tongue in cheek.
That's a full World Cup cycle that you've left out there. So who is to say what full 4 years can do? I'm just going to defend him here, but
I'm surprised you're not going for Andrew Porter over Tadhg Furlong and John Hayes here. You're number 1 person in the fan club.
No, I'm big. I think that competition sharpens people, Eoin. The blade sharpens the knife. Whatever that. What is it? The stone sharpens the whetstone of competition. Luckily enough, Neil is back to save us here. Neil, you're out halves. Let's go. Oh. Bedeviled by Skype issues. I'll tell you what's going to happen at out half.
All I heard was knives, stones. It was incredible that the line dropped just as I was getting to the big debate of it all. Out half.
Who's in, who's out? Neil's out, it turns out.
Gone again.
Yeah, okay, so his out half, he's gone for Johnny Sexton, which means Ronan O'Gara is on the bench. His centre partnership, as you'd expect, is Gordon Darcy and Brian O'Driscoll. On the wing, it is Tommy Bowe and Dennis Hickey, and at fullback, it is Rob Kearney. So the bench is Rory Best, Marcus Horan, Tadhg Furlong, Donncha, Peter O'Mahony, Peter Stringer, O'Gara and Keith Earls. It's not a bad bench. You would certainly be able to turn a lot of games with that.
It's hard to argue with that back line entirely, isn't it? Like it's hard to make, like, Keith Earls perhaps gets in and starts ahead of maybe Tommy Bowe, but even as I say that, it's like, no, Tommy Bowe probably has to start ahead of Keith Earls. Like, if you're talking about things that are very much unwritten, the career of Jacob Stockdale is one of those things, and he probably doesn't make it into the team just yet, despite the unbelievable heights of being our best player in a Grand Slam winning year. Rob Kearney has full back down. In a way, it's actually completely correct. And it's hard to make any strong arguments against that. I'm not sure what side of the fence you're on there. It's Rog versus Sexton really is the only debate.
Yeah, and look, maybe centre partnership, there's room for some suggestion that maybe, but then those careers haven't reached the high heights of Gordon Darcy just yet either in terms of, well, I suppose they have actually, when you think about it. Like the Ringrose and Henshaw have actually played in a slam-winning team, you know? I mean, it's obviously early on in their careers, although Bundy played a good bit in that season too. So, yeah, look, Darcy, again, maybe Darcy, is Darcy the Scottie Pippen of Irish rugby?
Oh, there's a take that, and a wormhole you just opened up. I was just about to say that, what does the likes of the John Hayes and David Wallace and that faction of Munster have on Neil Treacy that Ronan O'Gara and Peter Stringer don't?
Who knows? They're forwards? Is that the answer?
Maybe it is. Maybe they would do a bit more damage to you. But he certainly said that he had to keep Munster happy. And I'll certainly be looking forward to hearing O'Gara's take on why Sexton was put in ahead of him.
Well, I'd say he's probably watching now. So, Ronan, if you want to drop us a quick text there, we'll bring it to air soon. 9:30 this morning here. That's him dialing in. It's 9:30 this morning, and OTB AM. We're here 7:30 till 10 o'clock every morning during lockdown. If you want to get involved, you can just WhatsApp the show. 0879 180 180 is the number. Neil can't defend himself here, so we'll come back to this at some point. Exactly. All the more reason to pile on, Eoin says. We will come back to that out half selection. You can give us yours as well, and we'll bring some of them to air on tomorrow's show. We did want to talk a little bit about normal people, but we'll do that again later on in the week. We have a very special guest in this week's Now TV Culture Hall of Fame, none other than Louisa Harland of Derry Girls fame, and that is up next.
The OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brought to you by Now TV. Watch whatever you're in the mood for.
Okay, so you're very welcome along to episode 5 of the OTB Culture Hall of Fame on OTB AM. We're here with thanks to Now TV. All of our previous episodes are now available via the OTB Podcast Network. So that was Rocky 3 for Andy Lee. It was Gladiator for Dermot Kennedy. It was the US Office for Stephanie Preisner. And it was Fawlty Towers, essentially, for Kenny Cunningham. And we're delighted to welcome actor Louisa Harland to this week's episode. Louisa, a storied list of contributors that you're following in the footsteps of, but you've got a great one for us this week. First off, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And
thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, I'm in London. I wish I was at home, but yeah, I'm grand. Just like everybody else is grand, I think.
It turns out everybody's watching a lot of TV, which is, it's a good time to have one of the biggest, hottest TV shows on your resume at the moment, I suspect.
Yeah, it is great. I hear a lot of people are rewatching it, so that's really good.
Before we get into your choice this week, which is Kamara, will you talk to us a little bit about Derry Girls?
Will the following pupils please report to Sister Michael's office? Erin Quinn, Claire Devlin, Michelle Mallon, Orla McCool, and the wee English fella.
Will we get expelled? Nobody ever actually gets expelled. Wanda Gallagher hasn't even been expelled and she's an ARA. So that's probably why.
Don't worry yourselves too much about the whole sectarian conflict carry on. There's really only one thing you need to know. We're the goodies.
What sort of an impact being involved in something like that has for you?
Yeah, I mean, I never thought that I was going to do comedy. So it's been amazing in that respect. But in just so many aspects. I mean, being in a female-led comedy, being Irish, it being written by a woman, set in the 90s. It's just, yeah, it's an amazing thing, really, and nobody knew that it was going to take off like it did, so it's just incredible, really. It's hard to kind of fathom.
I saw one of your colleagues tweeting during the week that it was I think 3 years to the day since you guys met for the first table read, and then she said you all went off and got absolutely hammered that night, and
and we all we were like, we're going to get fired. We don't know if that went well, like they're probably going to recast the whole thing, but can't believe that was 3 years ago.
And what do you remember about that time? Like, because when you read it first, did you know how good the material was, or were you like, "This, if it's handled well, it's going to be good"?
I mean, absolutely. The as soon as I read the script, I knew it was going to be so funny, and I couldn't wait for my parents and my mates to hear it over in Ireland. I didn't think that it would necessarily make such an impact, kind of across the world. But my father's from Belfast, so I thought that I could totally do the Northern Irish accent. I was went in with my auditions, thinking I was nailing it. But yeah, I was not. So it took me took me a while to kind of like get the Derry accent, and I became obsessed with it. But I had luckily some cast members who are from Derry who helped me out a lot.
Whereabouts is your father from?
He's from Belfast.
Right. So that was this a vastly different accent to Belfast, or?
Well, he's lived in Dublin for the last like 30 years, so he doesn't really. But his uncles have. So I was going in as my Uncle Paddy, thinking I was nailing, the Derry accent, and they are totally different, which I got a strong lesson on. But it was it's fascinating, and I've spent a lot of time in Northern Ireland, growing up, going to Belfast. But like, it's. I thought I knew all about the Troubles. I thought I knew all about that, and I just learned so much about Irish history from being on the show and from around the girls. I've really enjoyed that aspect of it.
That is really interesting. Like I'm kind of quite fascinated by this whole thing because my parents are from Belfast and left 40 years ago, just as I was born, kind of refugees from the whole Troubles as well. And also I like to think that I did a good Belfast accent, especially when I'm talking to my parents. It's like, oh, it's perfect. But then when I try and replicate it, it's impossible. So what did you do? How did you get good at Derry and kill your Belfast? What happened? How did that work?
I listened to Radio Foil, and I just basically became very close with the cast and the two girls. Hi. Gorgeous.
Every week.
I two of the main cast, Saoirse Monica Jackson and Jamie Lee O'Donnell, they are proper Derry girls. So, it would have been embarrassing to not nail it. And they would tell you, and we'd ask every night, does this sound okay? Does this sound okay? And so they were good vocal coaches.
I think there's
like dropping the G at the end of certain words, that kind of stuff. And
and it's like how the THs turn into like double L's, like Muller instead of like mother, like all those type of things. I became obsessed with this, but it's beautiful accent.
There's like a YouTube tutorial on how to nail the Derry accent, and you in character is in the segment on the video as an actual educational tool for people in terms of how to learn it. It's one of the first results on YouTube. That's it. Like, is that how you learn it? Like, obviously you're listening to quite a bit of Radio Foil. Are you like talking back to the radio? Are you having conversations, or what was the technique that got the best Derry accent out of you?
Yeah, that's basically what I did. I would speak to myself loads, and my dad was the probably last person I could convince that I could do a Derry accent. I mean, because his daughter probably still hears my voice even through it. But I think with Orla, I tried to actually create another voice so that it would help me to kind of slip into that character and accent. So instead of kind of like making the tones of my voice Derry, I like changed the vocal tone so I could exaggerate it to kind of like get into the voice, and therefore I think that's how I kind of created part of my character through the voice.
Well, and look, it's brilliant. I rewatched the first episode again last night, and it's actually sensational. Like, there are so many little strands to the whole thing. Like that first episode as an opening episode, like I'd forgotten where everybody was positioned when the door opens and the body is discovered at the end. Spoiler alert. And like everybody is doing something. It's so sensational, and the performances are also great. Did you know after the first episode, when that's in the can, right, this is really good?
Well, obviously we don't film it. We film it all back to front, and like some of episode 6 in the first week and all that type of stuff. But when it first aired, we got the day after the first episode aired, we got a call for the second series the next morning. So we knew then it had done well. Yeah.
Can I ask which was a harder thing to get perfect, the accent or Orla McCool's unbelievable dance at the end of season 1?
Obviously the step aerobics. I mean, I put my life and soul into that. Actually I was terrified when I read that last episode, because I was going, this is actually quite poignant. This is actually quite a serious moment, and definitely the first kind of serious moment in the first series. So I was terrified to get the tone right. So I knew that I had to actually, take the step home with me after set every day and sleep with my step and do it a lot. But yeah, it was scary to film as well, because there was like 150 schoolgirls. And I was doing it, in the assembly hall. It was very real, and yeah, it was pretty method.
That's the remarkable thing about television show, isn't it? That I think obviously the hilarity of it all is what draws people in instantly. But I don't think it has the worldwide appeal. It perhaps doesn't have the mural unless it actually can tug at your heartstrings in a completely different way. Like, you think of the very limited list of television shows who can make you cry in two different ways, in terms of laughter and in terms of sadness. Derry Girls is up there. Scrubs is the only one I can think of at the moment, but I'm sure other things will come to me.
Yeah, Blackadder is another one. Last episode of Blackadder, classic. I cried when I watched it. And I obviously filmed it and wrote the script. It's Lisa McGee is really, I mean, there's so many elements that make up why the show is good and has been successful, but Lisa McGee's writing and her as a person is really the reason why.
Why do you think it resonates so strongly with so many people and in different age groups?
I don't know why. I think, well, I love the fact that it's a female-led show, but none of the women are sexualized, you know. It's there's such an innocence to Derry Girls, you know, and obviously we aren't 15-year-olds. So, you know, there's a really lovely kind of pure nature, I think, to Derry Girls that everybody kind of, you know, gets warmth from. And I actually still can't get over how people in the UK or in America or like Argentina are finding these so funny, because there's so many jokes that are even so specific to Derry, not even to Ireland, you know. So it's amazing, but it's just it's testament to Lisa's writing, I think, and the cast is brilliant, you know, it really is. And yeah, it's a real honor.
What parts about the Troubles and how present is that whole kind of, because it's a very important milieu, it's a very important part of the whole story, kind of. And even in the first episode, there's the bomb, which is stopping
on the bridge,
from happening, and
on
the bridge, and that continues for the whole. That's always there the whole time, the whole way through. Like, as somebody who kind of grows up largely post ceasefire, what was this whole thing like for you to be going back into that and kind of looking at it and going, okay, right, this was what this was like?
Yeah, crazy. As I say, you know, you learn about it in school and you think you knew about it, but I didn't really. And like, we were filming in Belfast around the 12th of July, and I saw an Orange March for the first time, which blew me away. Like, I was like, what? Like, I you know, just all of these things, and learning about it. And also Dylan Llewellyn, who plays the wee English fella, he didn't learn any about this in school. Yeah, not one little bit, you know, growing up in England. And we were like, what? So that was really fascinating. It was such a sad time, and all about community, and I've just learned so much.
I actually think that's one of the reasons why it works so well as well, is that it's like, I don't want to say it's not just comedy, but it's actually social history as well as comedy, or it's
totally
social history told through the prism of comedy. And like, it has to be funny for that to work, because if it wasn't funny, if it wasn't absolutely side-splittingly hilarious, then it's not going to work and people are going to tune out. But obviously they watch and it bears repeating. Can you take us back to the bit where you're confident enough to win this role, like, and you get to the point where you're reaching some kind of peak in your own career? How did you get to that point, and how, like, what had you done before this that prepared you for this? Because the first thing you said was like you were kind of surprised yourself that you ended up doing comedy.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I surprised everybody. But I always wanted to be an actor. I used to go to a young people's theatre group called Anne Kavanagh. Twice a week I did all my exams. I did lots of feshes, poetry feshes, Shakespeare cups and things like that. And then through that, I actually got a job in Love Hate, where I played Aidan Gillen's daughter in the second series. And I always knew I wanted to go to London to study theatre over there, because I heard that that's the best way to be able to get onto the West End or, you know, the Globe, is to, you know, train for those 3 years in London. So after I did Love Hate, which was amazing. And obviously, can I just say, when you look back, I obviously hate my performance and you're going, God, I wish I knew what I knew now. But such an incredible experience to work with that pool of actors on my first job. And then I went off and did 3 years in London. And then I got an agent through there. And then I started to do little bits of work. And I did a couple of years ago. Actually, the reason I got into comedy, I think, is because I did this one take streamed live film written and directed by Woody Harrelson, where he wrote this story where he had a night in London 10 years ago, true story. And he filmed this. He wanted to film it in one take and broadcast it live into 500 cinemas in the US while we shot it in the middle of the night in London. And it had a cast, Owen Wilson and Willie Nelson. It was really quite bizarre, and we rehearsed it like a play, and then we filmed it on that one night. And that was kind of my first thirst for comedy. And I think it was actually casting director Carla Strong who heard that I was doing that little comedy, well, not little, actually very, very incredible opportunity film, and got me in for Derry Girls.
How do you go from love-hate to Woody Harrelson? It's like,
yeah.
How'd you get that gig? That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I know. How did I get that gig? So literally, they were just looking for working girls in a particular scene, in a bathroom scene. So it was a very, very small part. So obviously, I had just graduated from drama school, so I was going up for anything. And they said, my agent said that the audition would be a 20-minute improv with Woody Harrelson, and I was like, well, he obviously won't be there. But okay, I mean, you get loads of these. And then I went and he was there, and I improvised with him for like 20 minutes. And I left being like, I can die now. I can, no matter, I'm obviously not going to get this, but I can die. And then I did get it. And then he wrote me another scene where I quoted Wes Anderson films with Owen Wilson. I mean, it sounds bizarre. Every time I repeat it, it sounds bizarre. And honestly, he's the nicest man. And it was just the best experience ever, really. It was kind of like doing theatre and film combined, because I really want to do theatre. Theatre is like such a love of mine. Just, it's really it for me. So it was kind of like a combination of the two. It was, it was amazing.
Can I ask if you remember any of the subject matter from that first improv session with Woody Harrelson?
I think he was saying he was trying to buy me a drink, and I had to refuse him at every cost. Do you know what I mean? Like, be repulsed by him. So it was kind of like, I mean, I blanked out, and I just, pure joy. But it really was such a scary, great learning curve. And again, to work with another like pool of actors like that was incredible. And then, that's basically how I kind of got asked to be seen for Derry Girls. And Derry Girls was a really long process. And I finally got it. It was, just amazing, really.
Are they your movies? Is your aesthetic the Wes Anderson? Is it the Life Aquatic and Royal Tenenbaums? Is that the type of stuff that you're into anyway?
I was a huge Wes Anderson fan. Royal Tenenbaums is one of my favorite films. Bottle Rocket, I'm big, and I'm a sucker for lovely aesthetics in films and colors, and I get swayed by that. I'll be honest. I'm a big fan of Wes Anderson, and it was just the most bizarre kind of dream come true. I think you can get it online. I actually think it's on Now TV.
Okay, great.
It's called Lost in London.
There you go. I'm going to dig that out. You're a fan of the matching Adidas tracksuit then. But that must be ridiculous.
Yeah, big fan.
You're like, they're going to get somebody to sit in for Woody Harrelson, and then it's actually him, and then he writes your scene, and then you're like kind of rapping to somebody who's been in the movies that you've grown up watching, and this is what?
Yeah. And actually, when we were filming season 2 of Derry Girls, the following 2 years later, he was in Dublin going to a U2 gig, and we had pints in Bison Bar, on the quays, and just that was a bizarre moment for me and all the staff in Bison. He's incredible, and meet your heroes, because he really is it. And taught me a lot about comedy, working with Owen Wilson, even in that small little scene that I did. He is just an ultimate pro. Pretty amazing.
I mean, look, it is sensational, and the success of the show obviously opens up loads of doors as well. Does that mean that you've got to recalibrate what it is that you think is possible, or is that the type of thing that actors can't really get into? You can't career plan too much, because
I'm not at that point in my career where I could pick and choose the jobs I would want to do. I'm still at the stage where I feel very privileged for any any opportunities. But I would definitely love to get into theatre. I just did theatre basically for the first time. I was in a play, a Carol Churchill play in London in the Royal Court with Toby Jones and Deborah Finley, and that was, has to be probably my favourite job I've done so far. Even possibly including Derry Girls, it was just such an incredible experience. So I have a real thirst for theatre, but I'll take anything. At this point in my career, I will take anything, and I just have such a love for it, and I know how hard it is. So I just feel so blessed to kind of, do anything.
Is it a reminder for everybody? Go on, try to do this quickly. The OTB Culture HoF is sponsored by Now TV. Stream award-winning dramas such as Gangs of London, Game of Thrones, and Parks and Recreation. Take it away, Eoin.
Just on that, is it the live element of it, and you might have got that bug as well in Lost in London, or is it the audience interaction and just feeling a separate energy coming from the crowd? What is it about theatre that is the thing that makes it the thing you want to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it stems back when I was younger, of doing like Shakespeare monologues and like fest competitions and poetry. But yeah, with theatre, you get like an instant reaction from the audience and that kind of instant buzz. You also get to like play the story from beginning to end and all the way through, as opposed to it's very disjointed when you film film and TV. But they're both amazing for different reasons. But theatre is, I don't know. It also comes from my love of live music, because my father took me to gigs my entire life, and I kind of see gigs the same as I see theatre, that kind of like live performance, that kind of like buzz, and how the audience changes that. I think I love.
Because I was going to ask you about music. You've got Kanye over your shoulder.
Oh yeah, well yeah, fair play for clocking that. That's Kanye's first album. I don't know if I want to say embarrassingly, but I'm a diehard Kanye West fan, and I have been since a very small child. So I feel like I haven't been able to give up on him on recent years, even though he's been hard to kind of stick by as a person. But I do love his music. Possibly a guilty pleasure.
No, I don't think so. I think that's totally fine. I mean, it's possible to take sections. Well, actually, I don't know if it's possible, but I certainly think it's possible to take sections of somebody's life and say, let's forget about his most recent stuff. Yeah. And let's just listen to The College Dropout and be absolutely happy with that.
Yeah. So now he's doing, I don't know if you've heard, he's kind of turned to like gospel music. He's brought out 2 gospel albums. So he certainly always has been evolving. So he's a fascinating artist to follow, for sure.
Well, look, it's time for us to ask you, what are you putting in the OTB Culture Hall of Fame? It's a TV series. Am I right in saying this TV series is a spin-off of a movie? The movie came first?
No, I don't know if possibly, I know it was a book originally. I haven't seen the film, and I'm actually not sure which. I think the series came after the book, but don't quote me on that. But the series, it's called Gomorrah. An Italian organized crime gang show set in Naples about a tower block that houses like 900 families, and it's based on a non-fiction novel. I mean, it's all based on fact, and it's just quite like The Sopranos or The Wire. It's very dark, shot beautifully. The acting is incredible, but obviously it's in Italian, so it's subtitles. But I've now come to realize that I think I need that to watch something fully, because I think with subtitles you can't be on your phone at the same time or do anything else, clicking through anything else. You actually have to fully watch the whole time, so it helps you stay engaged, and I think that really helps. And it's just so beautifully written and acted. It's highly recommend.
I don't want to miss this point. I actually watch most things with subtitles now. I might just be that I'm at a certain stage in my life where my hearing isn't very good from working in radio for 20 years with the earphones in. But I actually find that, that's what they said. And a very important plot point where somebody whispers something. You're like, okay, I get it now.
Yeah, totally. And I like to see it for the acting as well, like seeing almost like the script on screen, being like, how did they? Oh, that's how they acted that line, kind of thing. See it as a script. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. I'm with you. I watch everything with subtitles now.
I had it on for Tiger King, I'm not going to lie.
Oh yeah, great choice. I think I did as well.
I'd say Derry Girls is one of the most subtitled television shows in the world.
Probably. Yeah, I mean, I watch scenes back and I don't even understand what I just said sometimes. I'm like, what did I just say? But yeah, people say from Belfast. Like, I got into a cab in Belfast and he was saying he has to watch it with subtitles. So, yeah.
That's just Belfast trying to look down on Derry again. Come here, what about Gomorrah? So it's hyper-violent and...
It is hyper-violent. Yeah, it is hyper-violent and dark, but it's really a beautiful show, and Italy is so beautiful in it. Like, the south of Italy is so beautiful, and I mean, there's a lot of blood and unexpected killings, but I couldn't recommend it enough. Honestly, it's probably one of the best television programs I've ever seen.
What's it actually about? You know, the way these things all, like...
It's about a family business. It's basically like gang crime and around clans, around Italian kind of like mafia clans, and the relationships that go within that. Yeah. I don't want to ruin anything because it's kind of similar to... There's elements like Game of Thrones, which I haven't actually seen, but in terms of mass murder, like the amount of characters that die so painfully.
How many seasons are we talking?
There's 4 series, and I think the 5th season, although it's probably not filming now, it's probably postponed due to coronavirus. But the 5th season is actually going to be set in London, with the backdrop of London. So that's what I've been reading. So that's pretty exciting. But yeah, it's set in Naples for the most part.
Proper Italian mafia as told by Italian story makers about themselves, which kind of we don't get to see that much of, really. We tend to get to see American versions of what that would be like.
Yeah, exactly that. And I don't think that they could remake this and Americanize it. And if it did, it probably would be very like The Sopranos. But it's proper Italian, dark, just, yeah, beautiful cinematography, brilliant acting. Yeah.
Have you seen, I don't know if you've seen The Sopranos, but the scenes where they're in Italy are kind of the weakest scenes in the whole thing, because it looks almost like it's a bit cartoonish and and totally cliched, whereas actually this stuff is like, you can see that these are proper Italian actors.
Yeah, and I heard the actors were actually quite like nervous, and I know the author of the book was actually quite nervous that these people kind of did exist, and how quite scary people they were representing, and were worried about how it would go down.
I guess for an actor that must be a bit weird when you are portraying a real life character. It's fine when you are creating another human being who is a fictional person. You don't actually have to do anything. There's no responsibility to anybody except yourself and the audience. Whereas with this, it's like, the family still exists. The descendants are still out there.
Yeah, and secrets probably that they uncovered that they didn't want out there. It's a real proper thriller. It's brilliant.
Okay, so that's a recommendation for Gomorrah to go into the OTB Culture HoF. Oh, and I think we're going to put this in. I think that's how this works, really.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You don't have a choice, do you?
No, not at all. I haven't seen this. I'm kind of being educated on this as we go along. I'm currently on Gangs of London.
We're born into a certain world. It's chosen for us. Some might think it's brutal. No, please don't kill me! I say it's glorious.
Doesn't sound similar at all in terms of obviously location or anything like that, but I think it could be some sort of Italian version of this where, I don't know, but is there a constant threat that at any given moment there is going to be an unbelievable outburst of blood, gore and violence? This sort of ever-looming threat, a relaxing way to spend an evening. Like it's an unbelievable feeling, really, when you enter into those terms of a television show, that you're like, you're almost invested in the mortality of every single character. But not only that, the way in which they may meet their fate is probably going to shock you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is very much like Gamara. Isn't Gangs of London around the business? I don't know. Am I getting it right that it's around the business side of like corruption, or is it about gang life?
Well, so it's so the gangs got rich on heroin, and they're now developers essentially, and
okay,
and how they launder the money for the world's drug empire through London. So they're all still hyper violent criminals at heart, but they've also made so much money that they're trying to build skyscrapers. I think Gamara is more like on the streets, and it's the street
raw.
Yeah, the violence in Gangs of London is hyper stylized. It's kind of
okay.
You could imagine a Clockwork Orange score and people kind of enjoying it.
Okay, yeah.
Whereas I think like this is more bare hands, kind of a bit of that in Gangs of London too, I think.
Well, that's definitely on my list as well, Gangs of London, yeah.
It's worth digging out. Right, well, Louisa, you've been great with your time, and I think that we can definitely recommend Gamara to everybody. Like, so can you give us like roughly what your kind of top 2, top 3 all times are? Because like obviously for me it's The Wire and Sopranos, and then after that I kind of have to have a long think about what else makes it in.
Oh, I mean, in terms of dramas.
Yeah, and so where Gamara would be pitched at what kind of level of like you said it's.
Oh yeah, The Wire, The Sopranos. That is exactly. Any fans of that will eat this up.
Well, that's pretty good. Louisa, you've been great. Thanks a million, and congratulations on the run. When is New Derry Girls going to happen, or what is the kind of schedule you guys are on at the minute? Well,
we were meant to be filming now, so it is being postponed. But there definitely will be a series 3, hopefully sooner than later. But unforeseen circumstances at the moment.
Yeah. Well, no problems. Well, listen, as I said, you've been great with your time. Thanks a million for joining us here on the OTB
Lovely to meet you guys.
Fame. Sponsored by Now TV, stream award-winning dramas like Gangs of London, Game of Thrones, and Parks and Recreation, or Curb Your Enthusiasm, and Grey's Anatomy as well. We'll see you next week at the same time. Thanks a million.
The OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brought to you by Now TV. Watch whatever you're in the mood for.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
They spoke about